Some men spend their whole lives chasing power. Others spend it making sure power never touches the wrong people. Tonight, in a Chicago skyscraper no one was supposed to be watching, one quiet maintenance worker is about to remind the most dangerous men in the city why certain doors should never be opened. If this story already has your attention, hit that like button. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this one travels. Now settle in. This is going to take a while. The storm came in off Lake Michigan the way bad news always does, sideways, without warning, and with enough force to rattle the floor-to-ceiling windows on the 42nd floor of the Whitmore Logistics Tower like they were made of paper instead of tempered glass. Claire Whitmore didn't look up from her desk. She'd worked through worse. She'd built this company through worse. At 30 years old, she was the youngest CEO in the logistics industry's top tier, and she had not gotten there by flinching at weather. What she was staring at right now, however, the numbers arranged across 3 open monitors, the flagged wire transfers highlighted in the audit trail her assistant had quietly slipped under her office door before leaving. That was something she hadn't built herself up to handle yet. Because what those numbers said, if she was reading them correctly, was that someone had been systematically hollowing out Whitmore Logistics for the better part of 14 months. She sat back and pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of her nose. The merger documents were spread across the left side of her desk. $800 million. The Vantage Capital acquisition, 18 months of her life folded into 600 pages of legal language. It was supposed to close in 11 days. She'd fought for this deal. She'd restructured debt, renegotiated terms, sat across the table from men twice her age who looked at her like she was a calendar placeholder until she started talking numbers, and then they shut up and listened. She'd earned this. But the audit trail didn't match the filings. Specific expense accounts that should have been dormant for years had come back to life, quietly siphoning capital into a series of shell subsidiaries with names that sounded legitimate until you looked at the registration dates, all of them formed within the last 16 months. All of them linked, if you followed the threads carefully enough, back to a single point of origin she couldn't yet identify. Claire stood up and walked to the window. The city was down there somewhere beneath the rain, 42 floors of concrete and glass between her and the street. She could see the faint reflection of herself in the dark glass. Blazer slightly wrinkled from a day that had started at 6 in the morning, hair that had been neat 12 hours ago. The kind of tired that doesn't show up on a person's face until they happen to catch themselves in a mirror. She turned back to her desk and reached for her phone to call Marcus Webb, her head of security. Marcus had been with Whitmore for 7 years, longer than she'd been CEO. He knew every corner of this building, every protocol, every risk. She'd just unlocked the screen when she noticed it. On the floor beside her credenza, half tucked under the leg of the furniture, was a flash drive. Small, black, the generic kind you could buy in bulk from any office supply store. It had no label. She was certain it hadn't been there when she arrived this morning. She would have seen it. Her cleaning crew came on Tuesdays and Fridays. Today was Wednesday. Claire stood over it for a moment, the way you stand over something on the sidewalk that you can't quite identify, not moving toward it, not moving away. Then she picked it up and plugged it in. The drive opened automatically. There was one folder. Inside the folder were 47 files, PDFs, audio recordings, and what appeared to be screen-captured email threads. She clicked the first document and started reading. By the time she reached the 5th file, her hand had stopped moving. By the 10th, she was standing instead of sitting, and she didn't remember getting up. The files documented a coordinated effort, meticulous, patient, the kind of plan that takes shape slowly so nobody notices until it's already done. To manufacture a crisis inside Whitmore Logistics severe enough to force Claire's removal as CEO. The plan had 3 phases. Phase 1 was already complete. The capital diversions she'd found in the audit trail were intentional, designed to make the company appear financially unstable in the weeks immediately before the merger close. Phase 2, which was apparently scheduled to begin within the next 48 hours, involved triggering a regulatory review through a planted whistleblower complaint that would freeze the merger and trigger emergency board provisions. Phase 3 would use those emergency provisions to install a temporary management committee and install an outside candidate as interim CEO permanently. At the bottom of the most recent document was a list of names. Three of them were Whitmore logistics executives. The fourth name was Damian Holloway. Claire knew that name. Everyone in her industry knew that name. Damian Holloway was a private equity investor who had been circling the logistics sector for years, positioning himself to dominate the infrastructure side of national supply chains. He'd made approaches to Whitmore twice, once 18 months ago through an intermediary, once directly 8 months ago when he'd taken her to dinner at a restaurant on Michigan Avenue and talked about partnership and shared vision with the kind of smooth confidence that made her skin crawl. She'd declined both times. Apparently that had only changed his approach. She pulled out her phone to call the board's general counsel. The call connected and rang and rang. She disconnected and tried again. Same result. She tried her direct line to Marcus Webb in the security office. It rang twice and then nothing. Not voicemail. Just silence, and then the sound of dead air. She tried her assistant. Same silence. She looked at the signal bars at the top of her phone and watched them drop from 3 to 1 to 0. The building's cell repeaters were down. Claire stood in the middle of her office and took a breath that didn't come as naturally as it should have. She was not a person who panicked. She had disciplined that particular reflex out of herself years ago, because panic in a CEO's chair doesn't only affect you, it ripples. But there was something in the combination of what she'd just read and the sudden silence of her phone that produced a very specific kind of cold in the center of her chest. She turned off her monitors, pocketed the flash drive, grabbed her coat and bag, and walked out of her office. The 42nd floor executive suite was empty at this hour. It was nearly 11 at night. The cleaning staff had long since come and gone, and the only light was the ambient glow from exit signs and the city reflected through the glass. Her heels were quiet on the carpet, then louder when she reached the marble foyer near the elevator bank. She pressed the elevator button. The numbers above both elevator doors stayed where they were, neither one moving toward her floor. She pressed it again. Nothing. Claire turned and looked at the stairwell door at the far end of the corridor. Then she thought about the parking structure and the private service exit on level 2, a route she'd used a handful of times when she needed to leave without going through the main lobby, mostly during the early years when press had occasionally positioned themselves at the front entrance. The service corridor connected to a maintenance elevator that ran parallel to the main shaft and emptied into a back corner of the second-level parking structure. It was unglamorous and smelled faintly of whatever the building's industrial cleaning supplies smelled like. But it worked. She walked to the door marked Authorized Access, Maintenance, and badged through. The service corridor on the executive level was narrow, lit by fluorescent strips spaced wide enough apart that the spaces between them were genuinely dim. She moved quickly, her bag over one shoulder, the flash drive in her coat pocket, listening to the sound of rain against the exterior and her own footsteps. She didn't hear the other footsteps until she'd already turned the corner toward the maintenance elevator. 3 men. They were already there. Not approaching, not appearing suddenly, just standing in the corridor as though they'd been waiting for exactly this amount of time, as though someone had told them she would come this way. 2 of them were large, the type of physical presence that fills a hallway without appearing to try. The third was leaner, standing slightly in front, holding a radio that he clicked off and clipped to his belt when he saw her. "Ms. Whitmore." His voice was flat. "You need to come with us." Claire stopped. She was 12 feet from them, and the corridor behind her, she realized, was the only other direction available. She didn't reach for her phone because she already knew it was useless. "I don't know who you are," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she expected. "That doesn't matter," the man said. "It matters to me." He took one step forward. The other 2 didn't move yet, but there was something coordinated about the stillness. Not casual, not impatient, trained. "You found something you shouldn't have," he said. "We're going to need that back, and then you're going to come upstairs with us and have a conversation." "I'm not going anywhere with you." "Miss Whitmore, I said no!" The man looked at her the way people look at a situation they've already decided the outcome of. He started to take another step, and then, from the shadowed alcove to the right of the maintenance elevator, an alcove Claire hadn't even registered when she'd come around the corner because it was dark and set back and there was a junction box mounted to the wall that partially blocked the line of sight. A man stepped out. He wasn't large exactly. He was maybe 6'1", built in the economical way that doesn't advertise itself, wearing dark work pants and a jacket with a building maintenance logo on the chest. He had a face that was, there was no other word for it, quiet. Whatever expression lived on it had been reduced to its minimum requirements. He was holding a clipboard, which was absurd, except that he set it down on top of the junction box with the unhurried movement of someone who had simply finished with it. He looked at the three men blocking the corridor, and then he said, in a voice so level it barely qualified as a statement, "Wrong door." The lean man turned. The two larger men flanking him turned. All three of them registered the same information, maintenance worker, alone, no visible threat, and processed it through whatever training or instinct they operated on. The lean man reached for his radio. He didn't finish the reach. What happened in the next 22 seconds, Claire would count them later, replaying the sequence in the specific way your brain records things that don't fit inside your existing categories, happened so quickly and with such an absence of wasted motion that the most accurate description was not a fight. It was a correction. Lucas Hayes didn't rush. He moved like someone who had calculated the geometry of the corridor, the spacing between bodies, the order of threats before anyone else in that hallway had understood the situation had changed. He closed the distance to the lean man in 2 steps and redirected the reaching arm with his left hand while his right came up, and the man went down in a way that suggested his nervous system had simply been switched off. The first large man came from the left, and Lucas turned into him instead of away, absorbed the initial grab, used the man's own momentum as a lever, and put him into the wall hard enough that the fluorescent light above them flickered. The second large man actually threw a punch that connected, landing on the left side of Lucas's jaw with enough force to turn his head. Lucas took it, reset, and finished the engagement in a way that involved the man's own arm and a precise application of pressure to a joint that produced a short, sharp sound followed by silence. All three men were on the floor. Lucas stood in the corridor and rolled his jaw once, the only visible concession to the punch that had landed. He reached down and took the radios from 2 of the men. Then he looked at Claire. She was standing exactly where she'd been standing. She hadn't moved. She wasn't sure she'd breathed. "You're Claire Whitmore," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "You found the drive." She stared at him. "You put it there." "I did." "Who are you?" "Lucas Hayes. I do maintenance on floors 30 through 42. He said it like it was the complete answer, and maybe it was. "We should move. There are 2 more in the building, and they'll know these 3 aren't answering in about 4 minutes. Claire looked at the men on the floor. She looked at Lucas Hayes in his maintenance jacket with the building logo and the clipboard he'd set aside like he'd just finished checking a meter reading. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Not out," he said. "Not yet." He led her through a door she hadn't known existed, a panel in the wall of the service corridor that looked like a utility access but opened when Lucas pressed 2 points on its frame simultaneously into a narrow passage that ran between the building's outer wall and the interior structure. The passage smelled like concrete and electrical conduit and the faint ghost of cigarette smoke from some decade-long past. Emergency lighting ran along the base of one wall, casting everything in a dim amber that was just sufficient to navigate by. Lucas moved through it like he'd walked it 1,000 times. Claire followed, keeping the same pace, her bag clutched against her side. "How long have you worked here?" she asked. 14 months, she processed that. "And you've been... what exactly?" "Watching." "Watching what?" He glanced back at her without slowing. "The same things you found on that drive tonight, except I've been watching them happen in real time." "Why didn't you go to the board or the authorities or..." She stopped because she heard something in her own voice that she didn't want to hear, a rising quality that she associated with losing composure, and she reset. "Why come to me directly with a flash drive and no warning?" Lucas was quiet for a moment. The passage turned left and began a slight descent. "Because the board has 2 members who've been receiving payments from a holding company connected to Holloway," he said. "I didn't know which ones until 3 weeks ago. And the authorities..." He paused. "The federal filings you'd need to trigger an investigation take time I don't think you have. Whatever they're planning, they moved the timeline up. Tonight was supposed to happen next week." "What moved it?" "You did." He glanced back again. "Your audit request this morning. Someone on the inside flagged it." Claire absorbed this. The audit request she'd filed at 9 in the morning, a routine inquiry she'd drafted herself because something in the quarterly numbers had felt slightly wrong, a mild professional instinct that had apparently set off a chain reaction. "So they accelerated everything?" she said. "They couldn't let you get to the board with what you'd found." "What exactly did I find? I mean, the files on the drive they're about 80% of it," Lucas said. "The other 20% is on a server on the 38th floor. Backup documentation, payment records, communications between Holloway and your head of security." She almost stopped walking. Marcus Webb. 7 years of loyalty, and then Holloway found the right number. Lucas said it without particular judgment, the way you state a fact that's ugly but not surprising. He's been feeding access and information for 11 months. The passage opened into a larger space, some kind of mechanical room, she thought, filled with the low hum of building systems. HVAC equipment lined one wall. A workbench ran along another, organized with a precision that felt less like a maintenance worker's station and more like something else. There was a laptop mounted on a swing-arm bracket. 3 small screens showed feeds from security cameras throughout the building, the lobby, the parking structure, what appeared to be a service entrance on the north side, and 2 feeds from the executive floor. On one of the feeds, she could see her own office. She stood and looked at all of this for a moment. "You built this," she said. "I needed somewhere to work." He crossed to the laptop and began pulling up something. The building's original design included this room as a secondary environmental control station. Nobody's used it operationally in about 16 years. Maintenance logs show quarterly checks, but those checks have been filed automatically since 2019. "So you found a room nobody goes to and turned it into a place to keep an eye on things." He looked at the laptop screen. "We have 3 hours before the building's backup cell repeaters cycle back on. The primary ones were cut remotely. Marcus's team has the access codes. In 3 hours, they'll auto-restore if nobody overrides them. That's our window." "Window for what?" Lucas turned from the screen and looked at her directly. He had dark eyes that had the unsettling quality of appearing to process information on a slight delay. Not slow, but considered, like there was a step happening between observation and response that most people skipped. "They need you to sign something," he said. "Holloway is in the building. He came in through the parking structure 2 hours ago with 4 men. He's on the executive floor right now, in the North Conference Room, and he's waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For those 3 men to bring you to him." A pause. "The signature he needs is on a voluntary resignation. It's structured as a medical leave authorization that transfers executive authority to a management committee. It's written to look like you did it willingly. With the right witnesses and the right notarization, it clears the board provision that lets him install his own interim CEO before the merger window closes." Claire said nothing for a moment. She was thinking about 11 days. 11 days to the merger close. 11 days of work that represented 2 years of her life and $800 million, and a company her father had started in a logistics warehouse in South Chicago when she was 9 years old, a company she'd grown up watching him build and then taken over at 27 and rebuilt from the inside out because she believed in what it was. "If I run," she said, "what happens?" "They published the whistleblower complaint tonight, formally. By morning, the story is that you fled before a financial irregularity review, which is consistent with a pattern they've spent 14 months creating. The board invokes the emergency provisions because you're unreachable. By Thursday morning, Holloway's man is sitting in your office. And if I stay, then we have 3 hours and access to a building that I know better than anyone in it." He said it simply, not as a boast, just as a fact laid next to another fact. Claire looked at the security camera feeds on the 3 small screens. She looked at the workbench with its organized precision. She looked at Lucas Hayes in his maintenance jacket, with the mark on his jaw where the punch had landed, already showing the early shadow of a bruise. "You're not just maintenance," she said. "No." "Navy?" A small pause. "How'd you—" "The way you moved back there. My uncle was Army. You don't move like Army." "Navy SEAL," he said. 8 years. 2 deployments overseas and 1 I can't name. He said it the way people say things they've said before, not reluctantly, but without the addition of anything extra. "Why are you here?" she asked. "I mean, In this building, doing this job. Something moved across his face that wasn't quite readable. My daughter, he said. She's 6. Her name is Maya. After what happened in the service, after what I came home from, I needed somewhere I could raise her quietly. Somewhere nobody knew what I used to do or expected me to keep doing it. He looked back at the screen. This job made sense. Good pay, overnight shifts when she was at her grandmother's, and nobody bothers maintenance workers. You've been protecting this building for 14 months. I've been protecting Maya by keeping this job, he said. But yeah, when I started seeing what was happening here, I couldn't watch it and do nothing. A slight pause. I'm not built for doing nothing. Claire looked at him for a long time. Then she said, What do we need to do? They spent 20 minutes in the mechanical room while Lucas walked her through the plan. He did it the way someone briefs a mission. Not with drama, but with specificity. Floor layouts, timing windows, the location of the backup server on 38, the security access routes that Marcus's team had cut versus the ones they wouldn't know about because they existed in original construction documents Lucas had pulled from the city's building archive months ago and stored offline. He spoke, and Claire listened, and when she had questions, she asked them, and he answered them without treating the questions as interruptions. She noticed this. In rooms full of people who were supposedly working for her, she had spent years managing the particular dynamic of being a woman, asking questions that got answered slowly or partially, or with the subtle implication that she should wait and trust the process. Lucas answered everything she asked directly, and then asked if she had more. She liked him immediately, which was strange given the circumstances, and given that 25 minutes ago she hadn't known he existed. The server on 38, she said. Can we access it without Marcus's team knowing? The access route I'm thinking of doesn't go through any corridor they're monitoring. There's a vertical utility chase between 37 and 39. It's technically a maintenance access, not a data route, but I've mapped the connection points. We can reach the 38 server room from inside the chase, bypass the exterior keypad, and I have the internal override code. How do you have the internal override code? I do maintenance on that floor. Right. She paused. The documentation on the drive. It proves the fraud. The payment records, the communications. Is that enough for the board? Enough to stop them tonight, maybe? Enough to put Holloway away? You'd need the backup server data, too. He looked at her. And you'd need a board member you can actually trust. There's one, she said. Elaine Marsh. She's been on the board for 11 years, and she has no connection to anything I found in those files. You're sure? As sure as I can be about anything tonight, which I acknowledge is not very sure. She said it flatly, without self-pity. Just an honest accounting of available certainty. Lucas almost smiled. It didn't quite make it all the way to his face, but it got close. Fair. Can I reach her from here? Not until the repeaters restore. He checked his watch. A simple field watch, worn on the inside of his wrist the way military personnel sometimes wear them. 2 hours and 40 minutes. Then we go to 38 first. Yes. And then what? If we get the backup data and we get Elaine on the line, then we go upstairs, he said, to the executive suite, to Holloway. Claire said nothing. I know that's not what you were hoping to hear, he said. It's exactly what I was hoping to hear, she said. I just wanted to make sure you were willing to say it. Okay. The vertical utility chase was exactly as unglamorous as it sounded. It was a 4-foot-wide vertical shaft that ran between the outer wall and the interior concrete structure, accessible via a hatch on each floor that was padlocked from the outside, and which Lucas opened with a key from a ring on his belt. Inside there were rungs welded to the concrete at 2-foot intervals, and the sound of the building's mechanical systems filled the space with a constant low resonance that was almost physical. Claire climbed. She had removed her heels and put them in her bag and was now in her stocking feet on cold metal rungs, which was one of those specific indignities that you couldn't have prepared for, and which occupied a corner of your attention you couldn't entirely spare. You okay? Lucas asked from below her. I'm fine. I'm just thinking about the particular career choices that led to me climbing a maintenance shaft in a skyscraper at midnight. You made good choices, he said. Other people made bad ones. She climbed. The hatch on 38 opened into a mechanical alcove behind a server room that smelled like recycled air and electronics. Lucas bypassed the keypad the way he'd said he would, without hesitation, entering a sequence from memory, the door releasing with a soft click. The server room was small and very cold. 2 rows of rack-mounted servers, blinking status lights, the dense, almost botanical smell of hardware running continuously. Lucas moved to a specific terminal on the second row, pulled a cable from a pocket in his jacket, and connected a small device. "How long?" Claire asked. 12 minutes to pull the relevant partitions. She stood by the door and watched the hallway through the small window while he worked. The 38th floor was as dark and quiet as the 42nd. One set of lights was on at the far end of the hall, the financial operations bullpen, where someone had left a desk lamp burning. "Lucas?" she said quietly. "Yeah." "Why did you wait? 14 months of watching this happen. You could have moved earlier." He was quiet for a moment, focused on the terminal. "Because I needed to be sure," he said, "and because I needed the right moment, and because—" He stopped. "Because?" "Because getting involved meant getting visible," he said, "and I've spent a year and a half making sure nobody knows what I used to do, for Maya's sake. Once you step back into that world, it's not as easy to step back out." "But you're here now." "Yeah." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The device beeped softly. He disconnected it and pocketed it. "We're good." They went back into the utility chase. They climbed. Well, the executive floor was the same dim, rain-streaked space Claire had left, except now there was light visible from the direction of the north conference room. The glass wall panels were lit, and even from the far end of the corridor she could see the shapes of people moving inside. Lucas touched her arm and directed her, without words, to a service panel beside the elevator bank. They crouched in the shadow of the panel while he assessed the hallway. "He brought 4 men," he murmured. "2 are in the conference room. I don't know where the other 2 are. The 3 from the service corridor are still down there," he paused. "But whoever called in the non-response will have sent a second team." As if on cue, they heard the stairwell door at the far end of the corridor open. 2 men entered the executive floor, both in tactical clothing, both moving with the same trained purpose as the 3 from the corridor. They swept the hallway with flashlights, methodical, overlapping arcs, and began moving toward the center of the floor. Lucas pulled Claire back further into the shadow behind the service panel. The 2 men passed within 8 feet of them. Claire held her breath. She could see the equipment on one man's belt. Radio, something that might have been a taser, and a handgun in a hip holster. She had never been particularly close to that kind of hardware in her life. The proximity of it now produced an awareness in her chest that was specific and unpleasant, and she filed it away without letting it occupy more space than it was owed. The men continued past. Lucas watched until they reached the far end of the hallway and turned the corner toward the south wing. "Okay," he breathed. "That's 2, Claire whispered, "plus 2 in the conference room, plus Holloway." "Plus wherever Marcus is," Lucas said. She hadn't thought about that. Marcus, who had 7 years of institutional knowledge about this building, who knew every protocol, every override, every camera position. Marcus, who had been the person she called when anything felt uncertain, because 7 years meant you built a specific kind of trust. That trust was now a liability she couldn't fully calculate. "What's the plan for the conference room?" she asked. Lucas studied the lit conference room at the end of the north corridor. Through the glass she could see Damian Holloway. She recognized him from the dinner on Michigan Avenue, the same navy suit, the same composed assurance. Seated at the head of the table, speaking on what appeared to be a satellite phone. 2 men stood by the far wall. "There's something I need to show you," Lucas said, "about this building." "Now?" "Yeah." He glanced at the conference room again. "Holloway's not going anywhere. He thinks he's waiting for you to be delivered." A pause. "Let's make him keep waiting for a few minutes more." He led her to a maintenance room just off the main corridor. Another space that looked like nothing from the outside. A door marked Building Systems that opened into a room lined with circuit panels and control interfaces. But in the far corner, behind a secondary panel that swung out on hinges, was a touchscreen interface mounted to the wall with a keyboard below it. Lucas stood in front of it and entered a long alphanumeric code. The screen populated with a schematic of the building. All 43 floors laid out in cross-section, with a system of colored overlays showing power grids, HVAC, zones, and something else. A series of lines in red that trace the perimeters of certain rooms. Original building design, Lucas said. This tower was built in 1987, and the construction company had a specific security philosophy. Certain rooms, the executive suite, the boardroom, the conference rooms on 42, were built with integrated lockdown capability. Steel-reinforced doors and wall panels that drop from the ceiling on a mechanical system. Separate power supply. Claire stared at the schematic. They haven't been used since a security audit in 2003, Lucas continued. Most people in this building don't know they exist. Marcus Webb doesn't know they exist because it's in the original construction specs, and those specs aren't in the digital security files. They're in city archive records I physically retrieved. He looked at her. I can lock Holloway and his men in that conference room. From here. From here. She looked at the screen. She looked at Lucas. And then what? She said. Then you call Elaine Marsh, and you open a live board session, and you give them everything on that drive and everything from the 38 server. He paused. We've got, he checked his watch. 1 hour and 40 minutes before the repeaters restore. That's not much time for a board session. Emergency provisions allow for an abbreviated session with 7 members present. Elaine can convene it. You know the board bylaws. I know a lot of things about this company, he said quietly. I've been paying attention. She was aware, standing in this room with this man she had not known existed 4 hours ago, of a specific kind of feeling she didn't have a clean word for, something that sat between gratitude and something more complicated, the feeling of discovering that someone had been standing behind you in the dark for a long time, not to harm you, but to make sure nothing else did, and having absolutely no framework for what to do with that. Your daughter, she said. Maya, she's 6. Yeah. Something shifted in his face when she said the name. Where is she tonight? Her grandmother's. She knows I work nights sometimes. A pause. She thinks I fix elevators. Does she know you used to be a Navy SEAL? She knows I used to work for the Navy, he said. She's 6. She thinks that mostly means I drive ships. Claire almost smiled. She sounds like a smart kid. She's the smartest person I know. He said it with a quiet certainty that had nothing to do with parental bias. And I'd very much like to get home in time for breakfast. She nodded once. All right, she said. Tell me exactly how this works. Lucas laid it out in the careful, systematic way she had already come to understand was simply how he thought, not performing thoroughness, just genuinely incapable of proceeding without accounting for variables. He walked through the lockdown sequence, the timing required, the physical positioning they'd need to take in the building so that when the reinforced doors dropped, they were on the right side of them. He walked her through the communication plan, once the repeaters restored, who she would call first, in what order, and what she would say. He'd already written out the key points on a small notepad he pulled from his jacket, in handwriting that was smaller and more precise than she'd expected. He told her about the 2 men who'd swept the hallway and where they were likely to be in 90 minutes, and what he'd do if they returned before the plan was complete. He said that last part simply, without drama, as a logistical detail. You're not worried, she said. I'm aware of what could go wrong, he said. That's not the same thing as worried. What's the difference? Worry is what happens when you haven't prepared. Awareness is what's left when you have. She looked at him. How long has it been since you've done something like this? She asked. Any of this? He was quiet for a moment. Long time, he said. Does it feel different? He seemed to think about that honestly, without rushing to an answer. No, he said finally, which is probably something I should think about more when this is over. Claire put her hand on his forearm. Not quite a grip, just a point of contact. He looked at it and then at her. I don't know how to thank someone for this, she said. I mean, I know the words. I know how the gesture works. But I'm standing in a building where people tried to ruin everything I've spent my adult life building, and the only reason I have a chance to stop them is because a man I've never met decided to spend 14 months paying attention. You would have found it eventually, Pep, he said. The audit this morning. Maybe. And maybe too late. She held his gaze. So, thank you. He nodded once, in a way that accepted the words without adding to them. "Let's go," he said. At 12:37 in the morning, Claire Whitmore stood in the shadow of the maintenance room doorway on the 42nd floor of her own building, watching the light in the North Conference Room, while Lucas Hayes moved to the building systems panel and positioned his hand over the control interface. She thought about her father's company, the warehouse in South Chicago, the logistical pride of a man who moved things from one place to another and believed that was its own form of useful dignity. She thought about $800 million and 11 days and 14 months of someone else's careful, patient theft. She thought about Maya, who was 6 and thought her father fixed elevators. She thought about Damian Holloway, sitting at the head of a conference table in a Navy suit, talking on his satellite phone with the serene confidence of a man who had already won. "Ready?" Lucas said quietly. She took a breath. "Ready," she said. His hand moved on the panel. His hand moved on this panel, and the building answered. It didn't happen the way Claire had imagined it. There was no dramatic sound, no shudder through the floor, no obvious signal that anything had changed. The lockdown system was old enough that its designers had apparently believed that the most effective security was the kind that didn't announce itself. What happened instead was a series of very quiet mechanical engagements, somewhere inside the walls of the North Conference Room, that Claire couldn't hear from where she stood, but that Lucas had described with enough precision that she could picture them. Steel-reinforced panels dropping into their floor channels behind the glass walls, the door mechanisms engaging their secondary locks, the separate power circuit isolating the room from the building's main grid. From where she stood, the conference room looked exactly the same. The light was still on. The shapes of men were still visible through the glass. Damian Holloway was still at the head of the table, except now the room was a box that none of them could open from the inside. Lucas stepped back from the panel. He was watching the conference room with the specific attention of someone waiting to see whether a calculation holds. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Holloway stood up. He crossed to the conference room door and pressed the handle. He pressed it again. He turned to one of his men, said something Claire couldn't hear, and the man moved to the door and tried it with more force. The kind of force that suggested he was not a person accustomed to doors that didn't respond to force. The door didn't move. Holloway looked at the door, then at the wall panels, then around the room, and even from 40 feet away and through glass, Claire could see the sequence happening in his face. The momentary confusion, then the rapid calculation, then something that might have been the first early edge of anger, except that Damian Holloway was a man who had built a career on not letting people see when he was angry, so what actually appeared was a particular kind of stillness. He reached for his phone. "His satellite phone still works," Lucas said quietly. "The lockdown doesn't cut exterior communications, but it doesn't matter. There's nobody left in this building who can respond." "The 2 men who swept the hallway. They're in the south stairwell. I sealed that exit about 10 minutes before we came in here." She turned to look at him. "You sealed it before we came in, yes. How?" "Building systems panel gives me access to every electronic lock in the building. I've been managing it in stages for the last 90 minutes. He looked at her. "Since before I came to find you." She stared at him. "You had this planned," she said. "I had it prepared," he said. "Planning would have required knowing exactly how tonight was going to go. I didn't know that. I had options ready for most of the ways it could go." A pause. "This is the version where you didn't run. What's the version where I did run?" "The one where you got out but lost the company." He said it without making it a judgment. Just 2 outcomes of the same night, one of which they were no longer in. Claire looked back at the conference room. Holloway had his phone to his ear. His face was still composed, still wearing whatever expression he wore when things were not going the way he'd arranged them, and he wasn't yet ready to show that. She wondered what it felt like being Damian Holloway in this moment. To have built something this elaborate, 14 months of coordination, bribery, legal architecture, hired personnel, and to feel it go wrong in ways you couldn't immediately identify or locate. To stand in a room you can't exit and look out through glass at a dark hallway and understand that somewhere outside your line of sight, something was undoing you. She found that she did not feel sorry for him. 1 hour and 20 minutes, Lucas said. "I know." She straightened. "Let's find somewhere I can think." He took her back to the mechanical room, the one with the workbench and the camera feeds and the life he'd apparently been living inside the walls of her company without anyone knowing. She sat on a stool at the workbench and he made coffee. The coffee came from a small stovetop percolator on a 2-burner hot plate that seemed, along with everything else in this room, to have been selected for practicality over any other consideration. He handed her a mug that said Chicago Public Library in faded letters. She wrapped both hands around it. "Tell me about Holloway," she said. "What you know that's not on the drive." Lucas leaned against the opposite wall, his own mug in hand. "Private equity, you already know. He's built a portfolio of infrastructure companies over the last decade: freight, cold storage, port logistics on the East Coast. He's good at it. He finds companies with strong operational infrastructure and thin financial management, buys them at the right moment, and restructures them." He paused. "He's done it clean before. There are 5 acquisitions in his history where he came in through normal channels and made legitimate deals. So why not with Whitmore? Because you wouldn't sell, and because the Vantage merger changes the value of this company significantly. Once that closes, Whitmore Logistics becomes a much harder target. He had a window, and he was losing it." Lucas took a sip of his coffee. "So he stopped doing it clean. And Marcus." She said the name differently this time, not with the shock of an hour ago, but with the specific flatness of something that has been processed enough to be stated without the voice giving it extra weight. "Marcus was approached about 13 months ago," Lucas said. "I don't know the exact number they offered him, but based on the payment records I pulled, it was around $800,000 over the term, structured to look like consulting fees through a shell company. He makes $220,000 a year working for me," Claire said. "People make decisions that don't make mathematical sense when they make them," Lucas said. "I've seen it a lot. You've seen people get bought." "I've seen people find what their line is," he said. "Most of them didn't think they had one until someone found it." She looked at him. "Do you have one?" "Apparently not a financial one," he said, with just enough dryness that it landed like the first note of something human. She smiled despite herself. It was brief and it didn't reach her eyes fully, but it was real. "Fair enough." She turned the mug in her hands and stared at it for a moment. "The board members Holloway has connections to. You said 2 of them. Who?" "Richard Callow and Peter Vane." She absorbed this. Callow had been her father's appointment 11 years ago. Vane had come in during the restructuring 3 years back. She thought about the last several board meetings, the tenor of certain conversations, small things she'd noticed and filed away as personality rather than pattern. "Callow, I can see," she said. "He's been resistant to the Vantage merger from the beginning. I thought it was risk aversion." "It was opposition," Lucas said. "He's been actively working to slow the process from inside the board, requesting additional due diligence rounds that pushed the timeline out, which gave Holloway more time to set up the Phase 2 complaint." "Right. And Vane?" "Less active, more of an information conduit. He has dinner with a Holloway associate once a month at a restaurant in River North. Has for 8 months. He said it without editorializing, just the fact and the location, as though a restaurant in River North was just another data point and not a complete betrayal of someone who had trusted him with a board seat. Claire set down her coffee mug. She pressed the heels of her hands against the edge of the workbench and sat with that for a moment. "Peter came to my father's memorial," she said. Lucas said nothing. "He gave a speech. He talked about legacy." She looked up at the camera feeds on the small screens, the lobby, the parking structure, the executive floor. "I genuinely didn't know people could—" She stopped, started again. "I know intellectually that this happens. I've read about corporate fraud since business school. I've seen it affect other companies. You built something real," Lucas said. "People who build real things have a harder time assuming other people don't." She looked at him. "That's not a flaw," he said. "It's just a thing that costs you sometimes." She picked up her coffee again. "How do you see it? After everything you've seen in service, and then watching this for 14 months. He thought about it. Not performing thought, actually doing it. "People protect what they love," he said, "and they rationalize everything else. Holloway loves what money builds him. The access, the footprint, the specific kind of power that comes with owning the infrastructure everyone else depends on. Callow loves being on the right side of a winner. Marcus," a pause. Marcus probably told himself a story about how the company was going to change anyway, that Holloway was inevitable, that taking the money was just accepting reality early. "And you," she said, "what do you protect?" The answer came without hesitation. "Maya," he said. "Everything else is downstream of that." She nodded slowly. It wasn't a simple answer. There was a whole life compressed inside it, a career left behind, and a choice made that she could only partially imagine the weight of. But it was an honest answer, and she recognized those when she heard them. "Tell me about her," she said, "if you want." He looked slightly surprised by the question, not uncomfortable, just surprised. She asks a lot of questions," he said, "about everything. Why the sky is different colors at different times, how fridges know when to make ice, what happens to birds when it rains." A small pause. "She watched a documentary about migratory birds 2 weeks ago, and she's been asking me to find out where our specific pigeons go for the winter, the ones outside our apartment window." "What did you tell her?" "I said I'd look into it." He almost smiled again. "I have not yet looked into it." "Better get on that." "Yeah." The almost smile held for another second, and then settled back into the quieter version of his face. She looked at the clock on the laptop. 1 hour and 6 minutes. "Elaine Marsh," she said. "She's going to pick up when I call." "Is she a light sleeper?" "I have no idea. I've never called her at..." She checked. "At 1 in the morning." "What do you know about her?" "She's thorough," Claire said. "She's the one who pushed for the independent audit on the Vantage deal in the first round. She asks better questions than anyone else at the table, and she has no patience for people who assume the answer before they've run the numbers." A pause. "She'll listen." "Good." "She's also going to have a lot of questions about how I found all of this on a flash drive in the middle of the night. Tell her the truth, including the part where a maintenance technician has been running a shadow surveillance operation from inside a secret room in the building." Lucas considered this. "Maybe lead with the fraud documentation. Circle back to me." "That was a joke," she said. "I know, but the advice still stands." She looked at him for a moment. "When this is over," she said, "what do you want?" And I don't mean the question rhetorically. I mean, what do you actually want? He looked at the camera feeds. "To go home," he said. "And professionally?" "You can't stay in maintenance." "Why not?" She gave him the look that deserved. "Fine," he said. "I'll think about it when this is over." "Think about it now. We have an hour." "Claire." It was the first time he'd used her name. She noticed. "Yeah," she said. "Let's worry about the hour first." 50 minutes before the repeaters restored, Lucas took her back through the maintenance passages to do a sweep of the building's lower floors. The 2 men in the south stairwell were still there. Lucas confirmed it through a camera feed on his phone, a compact device connected to the building's internal camera network through an access point he'd set up months ago. They were sitting on the landing between floors 36 and 37, patient in the specific way trained people are patient, not restless, just waiting for a variable to change. "They know something is wrong," Lucas said. "They can't reach Holloway's men in the conference room, they can't reach the 3 from the service corridor, and they can't reach Marcus." "Where's Marcus?" "Building command post in the security office on 12. He's been running the communication blackout from there." A pause. "He doesn't know the blackout affects his team as much as it affects you. He's locked in his own operation." "Yes." "Does he know you exist?" "No." Lucas looked at the camera on his phone. "To the official building records, I'm an employee who does good work and never calls in sick. Nothing else. 14 months and nobody looked closer. Maintenance workers are invisible," he said. "It's an advantage I've used before, in different contexts." She understood what that meant and didn't ask for elaboration. They moved through the 29th floor, which was empty and dark, the kind of corporate emptiness that accumulates in large buildings after hours. The specific residue of hundreds of people having been somewhere and then not being there. The chairs slightly off angle. The half-full water glasses. The monitor that someone forgot to turn off, casting a pale glow on a desk in the middle of the open plan. Claire had worked in this building for 3 years as CEO, and she'd never seen it like this. It looked strange and a little vulnerable from this angle, all the ordinary daily work of hundreds of people suddenly exposed as fragile by its absence. You've walked all of this, she said. Every floor, multiple times. At night? Mostly. Day shift, I'm doing actual maintenance. Overnight is when I check things. What were you checking for in the beginning? He thought about it. Irregularities. Things that didn't match their own patterns. A team working late in a department that doesn't have a deadline. Copying that happens in unusual volumes. Access logs to floors people don't normally access. And you found them. Took about 2 months to start seeing the shape of it. Another 3 to understand what the shape meant. They came out of a stairwell into the lobby, vast and quiet, the marble floor reflecting the ambient city light coming through the glass facade, rain still tracking down the exterior in long silver lines. Lucas crossed to a panel behind the security desk, checked something, and crossed back. North entrance is sealed, he said. Parking structure access is sealed. The only open exit right now is the loading dock on the east side. For when federal investigators need to come in. Yes. He glanced at her. You're going to need to call them tonight too. Not just the board. Whatever the board decides, you need law enforcement moving before morning. I know. She paused. I've never called federal investigators before. You have a company counsel. Diane Park. She's going to be furious I didn't call her first. Call her second, right after Elaine Marsh. They stood in the lobby for a moment. Rain against glass. A building sealed around them. A floor above them, 2 men sitting on a stairwell landing, and a floor above that, a conference room with Damian Holloway growing slowly and carefully angry in the specific way of men who are very dangerous when their plans unravel. Lucas, she said. Yeah. What happened? In the service? The deployment you couldn't name. She said it carefully. You don't have to answer that. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to. We lost people, he said. That's the shape of it. We went into a situation with information that turned out to be compromised, and we lost people. He looked at the rain on the glass. 3 men who had families. 1 who had a kid on the way. I'm sorry. I came back and Maya was 2.5, and she just started talking, and she didn't understand why I kept flinching at sounds. He said it the way you say things that no longer have the power to destroy you on a daily basis, but haven't lost their weight entirely. I spent about 6 months being not great, and then I got better, mostly, and I decided I was done with situations where someone else's bad intelligence could put me somewhere that got people killed. But you're here. I put myself here, he said. That's different. He turned from the glass. I know exactly what the intelligence is. I gathered it, and the only people at risk tonight are the ones who chose to be. He looked at her. Except for you, he said. I chose to be here too, she said. You didn't have the same information when you made the choice. No, but I had you. He looked at her for a moment with that specific quality of attention he had, considered, calibrated, like he was giving her statement its exact due weight before he decided what it meant. 35 minutes, he said. They went back upstairs. The mechanical room, when they returned to it, felt different than it had an hour ago. Smaller, or maybe just more real, the way spaces feel when you've left them and come back and the familiarity has calcified into something more specific. Claire sat back on the stool. Lucas stood at the laptop and checked the camera feeds. In the conference room on 42, Holloway was seated again. He was on his phone. His 2 men were positioned near the walls. Nothing in his posture suggested panic. He was leaning slightly back, one hand flat on the table, and he could have been in any business meeting in any city, except that the room he was in had steel reinforcements behind the walls and a door that wouldn't open. He's been on the phone a lot, Claire said, watching the feed. Satellite phone works. He's trying to coordinate something external. Lucas zoomed the camera feed slightly. But whoever he's calling isn't in a position to help him from the outside. The building's external access is controlled. He'll figure out eventually that something structural is happening. He already has, Lucas said. Look at his hands. She looked. The hand that was flat on the table, the fingers were moving, just slightly. A rhythmic tap, barely perceptible, the kind of movement that leaks out of a person when the surface they're presenting is costing them something. Damian Holloway was working to stay composed. Good, she thought. Let him work for it. What do we do if he damages the room? She asked. The glass, tempered and reinforced. The same system that locks it is designed to contain. It was built for exactly this situation, security threats from inside the building during a crisis. Someone had a specific imagination. 1987 was a different time for building security. He closed the camera zoom. He's not getting out of that room. But 22 minutes. Claire pulled out the flash drive from her coat pocket and set it on the workbench in front of her. She looked at it. Small, black, unremarkable. The kind of thing you could lose in a desk drawer. How did you get everything onto this? She asked. 4 weeks of work, Lucas said, pulling files incrementally, small enough to not trigger any transfer flags. The audio recordings I captured myself through the building's existing intercom infrastructure. There are speaker points in the executive conference rooms that I access through the audio control system. Is that legal? He looked at her. I mean for the purposes of using it as evidence, she clarified. In Illinois, the one-party consent statute covers recordings where the recorder is present or has reasonable access to the space, he said. I'll let your lawyers argue the access question. But the written documentation and financial records were transferred from systems you own by someone with authorized access to the building's infrastructure. You're saying the technical argument is defensible. I'm saying Diane Park is going to have a lot of work to do. Claire almost laughed. It was the wrong moment for it, and she felt it start and pulled it back, but the sensation was real. The specific kind of exhausted, absurd humor that surfaces in prolonged crises when your body runs out of appropriate responses and starts cycling through the inappropriate ones. 14 minutes, Lucas said. She straightened, settled herself. Walk me through what I say to Elaine. He did. He was precise and brief, giving her the key points in the order they'd land most effectively, and she listened and mentally reorganized them in the way she knew Elaine Marsh's specific listening style would receive them best. This was what Claire did. She had always been able to map the internal logic of a conversation before she was inside it, to see the architecture of how information needed to move. It was the skill she'd used in every negotiation, every board meeting, every difficult conversation she'd had to navigate as a young CEO in rooms that hadn't originally expected her. She just hadn't used it in a situation where the alternative was losing her father's company to a man in a Navy suit who was currently trapped in her conference room. 7 minutes, Lucas said. Lucas Barassin. He moved to the far corner of the room where the repeater reset would happen first, a small indicator light on a panel that would turn green when the building's cellular systems came back online. He watched it the way he watched everything, without visible impatience, just attention. Claire held her phone. She thought about her father, not sentimentally. She wasn't built for pure sentiment in a crisis, and she knew that about herself. But practically in the way she thought about him when she needed to access whatever part of herself had decided at age 12 that she was going to run this company someday. Her father had been a man of absolute operational clarity. He could see the real problem inside a situation faster than anyone she'd ever known, cut through the distraction and noise, and get to the load-bearing fact that everything else depended on. She'd inherited that or learned it or both, and right now she needed it. The load-bearing fact was simple. She had the evidence. She had the documentation. She had 14 months of careful work from a man who had no stake in this, except the conscience that came with knowing what was right and not being able to walk away from it. She had the truth, and she had an hour in which to use it before people who were very good at making truth inconvenient got access to systems that could do exactly that. That was all there was. 3 minutes, Lucas said. She watched the light. Lucas? Yeah. When this is over, she stopped, restarted. I mean, after tonight, when everything is settled and the lawyers are done and the board has done what it's going to do. She looked at him. I want you to bring Maya to the office. He turned from the panel. She'd probably like it, Claire said. 42 floors. I can show her the elevator controls. Something in his face shifted. Not the almost smile this time. Something quieter than that, and less guarded. She would love that, he said. The indicator light turned green. Claire's phone signal bars returned. 1, 2, 3, and then full. She found Elaine Marsh's number and pressed call. It rang once, twice. She heard the sound of someone picking up in the particular way people pick up at 1 in the morning, awake faster than expected, already slightly alert, the way certain people are because something in their nervous system understands that late-night calls carry different weight. "Claire?" Elaine's voice was sharp and fully present, no sleep blur in it at all. "Do you know what time it is?" "I do," Claire said. "And I need you to listen to everything I'm about to tell you, because we have about 45 minutes before this becomes significantly more complicated." A half-second pause. "Go ahead," Elaine said, and Claire started talking. She laid it out the way Lucas had suggested, and then she reorganized it on the fly the way her own instincts told her Elaine needed to hear it. And she didn't stop for questions, even when Elaine started asking them. She said, hold on, let me finish." And Elaine, who was a woman with enough professional experience to know when to defer to the pace of a situation, held on. She talked for 11 minutes. When she stopped, there was a silence on the other end of the call that lasted long enough to count. "Send me the files," Elaine said. Her voice had changed, not softer, more focused, the specific register of someone who has received information that is serious and has decided to treat it accordingly. "Right now," Claire said. She looked at Lucas, who was already pulling up a secure transfer application on the laptop, and she pulled the drive from the workbench and inserted it. "I can get a quorum," Elaine said. "Not the full board, not at this hour. But emergency provisions require 7. I can get 7, excluding Callow and Vane." Another silence. "Yes," Elaine said quietly, "excluding Callow and Vane." The file transfer began. Lucas watched the progress bar. "I need one more call," Claire said, "and I need it to happen simultaneously with the board session." "Who?" "Federal investigators, Economic Crimes Division." She looked at Lucas. "I have documentation of wire fraud, securities manipulation, and conspiracy to commit corporate fraud. If they're not in the building by the time the board session closes, we run the risk of evidence being destroyed through remote systems." "Marcus Webb controls the building's data systems," Elaine said. "He does, which is why we need law enforcement here before he understands that his side has lost." A pause. "Claire," Elaine's voice was careful now, moving through something more personal than procedure. "You've been in this building since 11 o'clock tonight. Are you safe?" "Yes," Claire said. "Are you alone?" She looked at Lucas, who was watching the file transfer with the same level attention he gave to everything. "No," she said. "I'm not alone." She heard Elaine exhale, a small sound, but real. "All right," Elaine said. "Give me 20 minutes to make calls. I'll set up the emergency session for 2:15. Keep your phone on and stay where you are." "I'll have everything uploaded to the board's secure portal by 2, Claire said. "Good." A pause. "And Claire, this is going to be a difficult few weeks even after tonight. I know. The company is going to be fine, you understand that." It wasn't a platitude from Elaine, but nothing from Elaine was a platitude. It was a board member looking at the evidence and making an assessment and stating it. Claire understood the difference, and it landed differently because of that. "I know," she said again, and meant it differently the second time. She ended the call. Lucas was still watching the file transfer. 73%. The quiet of the mechanical room settled around them. The hum of the building systems, the distant percussion of rain against the exterior, the small sound of data moving from one place to another in the dark. "The board session is at 2:15, she said. "I heard. And I need to make a call to federal investigators." "I can get you the right number," he said. "Economic Crimes Task Force, Chicago Field Office. The agent to ask for is Karen Del Vecchio." He said it without looking up from the laptop. "You have the name of the federal agent. I've had this contact for 6 weeks, he said, in case I needed it." "In case you needed it," she repeated. "I said I'd prepared options," he said. "This was one of them." The file transfer completed. Lucas disconnected the drive and handed it back to her. She sat with the drive in her hand for a moment. The same small, black, unremarkable object that had started all of this in her office 3 hours ago. The same thing and a completely different thing. She pocketed it. "Okay," she said. She called Karen Del Vecchio. The call went to voicemail, an office voicemail, formal and brief. And she left a message that was 11 seconds long and specific enough that she was fairly certain the return call would come within 15 minutes, regardless of the hour. She was right. It came in 9. The conversation was different from the one with Elaine, stripped of any personal register, just the facts, and the documentation, and the location, and the timeline, and Del Vecchio asking 4 questions that were precise and good, and which Claire answered without hesitation. At the end of it, Del Vecchio said she'd have a team at the building's east loading dock within 35 minutes, and she'd need Claire to meet them there. 35 minutes, Claire said. The board session starts at 2:15. The board session can start without you physically present if you're on a video call, Del Vecchio said. What I need is physical access to the building, and I need someone who has the authority to provide it. Claire looked at Lucas. I can meet you at the dock, she said to Del Vecchio. I have someone who can facilitate access. She ended the call. Lucas was already reaching for his keyring. Loading dock on the east side, she said. I know where it is, he said. Of course you do. He moved toward the door of the mechanical room, then stopped and turned back. He crossed to the workbench and picked up something she hadn't noticed before. A small hard case, compact, the kind that looks designed for a specific piece of equipment. He picked it up and checked the contents briefly, then closed it and put it in the inner pocket of his maintenance jacket. She didn't ask what it was. Some things you know without asking, and there's a moment in a night like this when asking makes you seem like someone who hasn't been paying attention. She followed him out of the room, and the door closed behind them, and the building held them both as they moved through it. The building that Lucas Hayes knew better than anyone, that he had walked for 14 months in the early mornings and late nights, while a 6-year-old girl slept at her grandmother's and waited for her father to come home, while a woman on the 42nd floor ran a company her father had built and trusted the people around her more than she should have, while a plan assembled itself in the space between those two lives and waited for the right night to come apart. Down the maintenance passage, through the vertical chase, down to the east loading dock where the rain was still coming in off the lake, where the overhead door let in a bar of wet, cold air when Lucas raised it from the control panel. They stood in the opening and waited. Lucas had his hands in his jacket pockets. Claire stood beside him, her coat slightly damp at the shoulders from an earlier stretch through the utility chase, her phone in her hand, her eyes on the service drive beyond the loading dock where headlights would appear in, she checked, 22 minutes. You should eat something, Lucas said. She looked at him. There's a vending machine on 31, he said. I checked it last week. You're telling me to get snacks from a vending machine. I'm telling you that you've been running on coffee since about 11, and it's almost 2 in the morning, and there's still a lot of night left. He looked at the service drive. I'll go. You watch for the car. She almost told him she was fine. The thing you say by reflex when you're in charge and someone points out a human limitation, because acknowledging limitations feels like ceding something. She stopped herself. Anything without peanuts, she said. He nodded and turned back into the building. She stood in the dock opening with the cold air on her face and the rain on the service drive and the city below, and behind all of it, the quiet, enormous, complicated fact that in about 11 minutes, she was going to sit down in front of a video call with 7 members of her board and begin the process of either saving her father's company or watching it leave her hands for good. She breathed. She stood there until she heard footsteps behind her. Lucas, back from 31, 2 granola bars and a bag of pretzels. He handed her one of the granola bars. Oat and honey, he said. Only non-peanut option. Perfect, she said. They stood side by side in the dock opening and ate. The rain fell. The city hummed 42 floors below the executive suite, where Damian Holloway was beginning to understand, in the particular dark of a locked room, that the night was no longer going the way he'd planned. On the service drive, headlights appeared. The headlights belonged to 2 vehicles, a dark sedan and a black SUV that pulled into the service drive with the kind of unhurried precision that suggested the people inside had been briefed on the way over and were arriving with a clear operational picture. They cut their lights before they fully stopped, which Claire noticed and filed away as a detail that told her something about how seriously Del Vecchio had taken the call. Karen Del Vecchio herself was the first one out of the sedan. She was shorter than Claire had imagined from the phone voice. Compact, maybe late 40s, wearing a dark jacket over a collared shirt that suggested she'd dressed quickly but not carelessly. She had the kind of face that processed a room before it offered anything in return. And the first thing she did when she reached the loading dock was look past Claire at Lucas. "Hayes," she said. Lucas looked at her. A beat. "Del Vecchio," he said. Claire looked at both of them. "You know each other," she said. It wasn't a question. "We've been in contact," Del Vecchio said, moving into the dock. Behind her, 4 agents followed, 2 in tactical gear, 2 in civilian clothes carrying equipment cases. "Mr. Hayes flagged this situation to my office 6 weeks ago. We've been building a parallel file." Claire turned to Lucas. "You called federal investigators 6 weeks ago," she said. "I said I'd prepared options." "You said that, yes. This was the one I wasn't sure I'd need to use." He held her look without apology. If you'd found the drive and acted on it through normal channels, Del Vecchio's team would have been the backstop. When the timeline accelerated tonight, it became the primary. She stared at him for another moment. There were things she wanted to say about the experience of discovering, repeatedly, that a man she'd met 3 hours ago had been thinking 12 steps ahead of a situation she hadn't known she was in. She set them aside. "What do you have in the building?" Del Vecchio asked, producing a tablet and pulling up a floor schematic that Claire recognized as slightly less detailed than the one on Lucas's building systems panel. "Damien Holloway, locked in the 42nd floor north conference room," Claire said. 2 associates with him. 2 additional operatives sealed in the south stairwell between 36 and 37. 3 men incapacitated in the service corridor on the executive level. They'll need medical attention. Del Vecchio looked at Lucas. "All contained?" "All contained," he said. "The building's external access is controlled from a panel on 42 that I can operate remotely." He produced his phone and showed her the access interface. "I can release or restrict any exit point on your direction." Del Vecchio looked at the interface the way someone looks at something that confirms something they already suspected. "You built this," she said. "I used what was already here," Lucas said. "Mostly." Del Vecchio turned to one of her agents, a tall man with a crew cut who appeared to already know what she was going to say. "Coordinate with Hayes on the south stairwell first. Get those 2 secured before we move to 42. She looked at Claire. "Miss Whitmore, I understand you have a board session starting at 2:15. 2:15, yes. Where are you doing that from?" "I don't have a location yet," Claire admitted. "Use the conference room on 38, Lucas said. It's clear, it has video capabilities, and I can get the building's conference system running in about 4 minutes. Del Vecchio checked her watch. "You have 18 minutes. "Then we should move," Lucas said. Set. The 38th floor conference room was a mid-tier meeting space, not the executive suite's north room where Holloway was currently learning the architectural limitations of 1987 construction, but a functional, professional room with a long table and a video screen at one end, and the kind of neutral corporate decor that said nothing about anything. Lucas had the conference system up in 3 minutes and 40 seconds, during which Claire stood at the window and watched the rain, and held her phone, and tried to locate, inside whatever she was made of, the specific kind of steadiness she was going to need for the next hour. She'd run difficult board meetings before. She'd delivered bad news, managed disagreements, navigated the particular politics of a room full of people with overlapping interests and varying agendas. She knew how to do this. What she hadn't done before was walk into one having spent the previous 3 hours in maintenance shafts, eating a granola bar at a loading dock, and discovering that the head of security she'd trusted for 7 years had been taking money to help dismantle everything she'd built. The human reality of that was somewhere inside her, running parallel to the operational clarity she was currently requiring of herself. She was aware of it the way you're aware of an injury you've set aside until you have time to look at it properly. Not denying it, just not giving it the floor right now. "Systems live," Lucas said from the conference table. "You can launch the board portal from any screen in the room." She turned from the window and sat down at the head of the table. She pulled out her laptop and opened the secure board portal. 8 invitations had already been sent. Elaine had moved fast. 7 accepted. 1 pending. "Callow's still pending," she said. "Let him stay pending." She almost smiled. "He's going to know something is wrong when the session starts without him." "He already knows something is wrong. His phone's been going unanswered for 2 hours. Lucas leaned against the wall near the door, arms crossed, watching the door rather than her screen. maintaining the same environmental awareness he'd been running all night. The door, the corridor, the camera feed on his phone. "You can sit down," she said. "I'm fine standing." "Lucas." He looked at her. "It's a board meeting," she said. "The building is locked. Delvecchio's team is handling the stairwell. Sit down." A pause. He pulled out a chair and sat, but he sat at an angle that kept the door in his peripheral vision, and she decided that was probably as much as she was going to get and let it go. At 2:13, Elaine Marsh's face appeared on the conference room screen, followed in rapid succession by 5 more board members: Harriet Cole, James Okafor, Sung Park, David Reeves, and Michelle Tran. 7 windows arranged in a grid, 7 people who had been reached by phone in the middle of the night and had gotten out of bed and logged into a secure portal because Elaine Marsh had called them and told them to, and whatever Elaine said when she called them had been sufficient. "Claire." Elaine's voice had the same focused quality it had carried on the phone earlier, but now there was a gravity added to it, the gravity of having spent the last hour making calls and reading documents and arriving at the full weight of what she'd been told. "Thank you for being here," Claire said. "All of you. I know the hour." "Start from the beginning," said James Okafor. He was 71 years old and had spent 30 years on corporate boards across 3 industries, and he had the voice of someone who had heard many bad situations described badly and preferred them described well. Claire started from the beginning. She spoke for 9 minutes without stopping, and she laid it out in the order Lucas had suggested, and then reorganized on the fly in the way her own read of the room, even a virtual room, told her to. She gave them the financial irregularities first, because the numbers were the foundation and the numbers were incontrovertible. Then she walked them through the structure of the conspiracy, the shell subsidiaries, the payment records, the communications between Holloway's organization and Marcus Webb. Then the Phase 1 manipulation of the company's financial appearance, the Phase 2 whistleblower strategy, the Phase 3 emergency provisions play. She told them about the flash drive and who had left it for her to find. She told them that Damian Holloway was currently on the 42nd floor of this building in a locked conference room, having arrived tonight to obtain her coerced signature on a voluntary resignation that was constructed to look like a medical leave authorization. The board was quiet for a moment when she finished. Elaine spoke first. "The documentation you transferred to the portal, I've reviewed the first third of it in the last 90 minutes. It's consistent with what you're describing, and it's extensive. I want someone else to confirm before we proceed formally." She looked off screen for a moment. "Sung, you're the closest thing we have to a financial forensic background on this board." Sung Park, 53, former CFO of a manufacturing conglomerate before joining the board, nodded once. "I've been looking at it since 2 o'clock. The capital diversion pattern is real, and it's deliberate. The shell company structure is specifically designed to be difficult to trace quickly, but the documentation in the portal goes several layers deeper than the surface pattern. If this is fabricated, it's fabricated by someone with an extraordinary level of access to legitimate records." He looked at the camera. "Claire, the only way this information could be this accurate is if it was pulled from inside the company's own systems." "It was," she said, "by your maintenance technician." "By a former Navy SEAL who took a job as a maintenance technician 14 months ago because he needed to raise his daughter somewhere quiet," Claire said. She kept her voice even. "And who, in the process of doing his actual job, noticed that something was being done to this company and spent those 14 months documenting it." Another silence. "Where is he now?" Harriet Cole asked. She was the oldest member of the board, 82, and had been on it since Claire's father's tenure. She asked questions with the directness of someone who had long since stopped worrying about how directness sounded. "He's in the room with me," Claire said. A shift in the board's collective register. Several faces adjusted slightly, the way people adjust when they realize a conversation has an additional participant they hadn't accounted for. "Can we see him?" Harriet asked. Lucas, from his chair at the side of the table, looked at Claire. She tilted her head toward the camera. He moved his chair so he was in frame. 7 board members looked at Lucas Hayes in his maintenance jacket with the building logo on the chest and the bruise forming on the left side of his jaw from the punch that had landed 2 hours ago. "Mr. Hayes," Harriet said. "Ma'am," Lucas said, "you've been protecting this company for 14 months without anyone asking you to." He thought about that for a moment. I've been doing my job, he said. The rest of it, I just couldn't see what was happening and walk away. Harriet looked at him for a moment with the particular attention of someone who has encountered a great many people and has become very good at the evaluating of them. All right, she said, apparently to herself as much as anyone. Then to the board, I've seen enough. Can we proceed? Elaine called the session to order. What followed was 40 minutes of the most compressed, consequential board procedure Claire had ever been part of. Elaine ran it with the precision of someone who had prepared for exactly this, moving through the agenda items in an order that minimized procedural vulnerability. First, the formal acknowledgement of the evidence, then the suspension of the emergency management provisions that Holloway's Phase 3 play had been designed to invoke. Then the formal rejection of any resignation or authority transfer executed or pending since the start of business that day. And then, most critically, the unanimous authorization of Claire Whitmore as CEO with full executive authority, documented and time-stamped against any subsequent legal challenge. 7-0. The pending invitation from Callow sat unanswered throughout. When it was done, Elaine looked at the camera with an expression that was not quite satisfaction, but was something close to relief. The specific relief of a situation that has gone to the edge and come back. Claire, she said, the company is yours. It has been yours. It was never anything else. Claire held that. Thank you, Elaine. Don't thank me. Get some sleep when this is over. A pause. And someone please make sure that man gets medical attention for his face. Lucas, who was back at the edge of the frame, reached up and touched his jaw as though he'd forgotten about it. I'm fine, he said. You have a bruise the size of a baseball on your left jaw, Harriet said. It's not as bad as it looks. It looks quite bad, Harriet said, with the tone of a woman who had raised children and was not impressed by stoicism. The session ended at 2:57. Claire closed the laptop and sat in the suddenly quiet conference room with the hum of the building around her and the rain still doing what rain does when it's committed to a night of it. Lucas was on his phone, coordinating something with Del Vecchio's team. She could hear the brevity of it. Short exchanges, logistics, none of the elaboration that normal people use to fill conversational space. He ended the call and looked at her. South stairwell is clear, he said. Del Vecchio's team has the 2 operatives. They're working toward the 3 in the service corridor now. And Holloway. Still in the conference room. He checked the camera feed on his phone. He's standing now. He's been on his phone continuously for the last 20 minutes. He can't reach anyone. He can reach people outside the building. He just can't reach anyone inside it who can help him. Lucas set his phone on the table. He's going to know the board session happened. If he has any inside information from Callow or Vane, he knows, Claire said, or he's figured it out. She looked at the conference room door. Which means we should move before he finds a way to use whatever time he has left. Del Vecchio wants her team in position on 42 before we go up. How long? 12 minutes. She nodded. She looked at her phone, 3 missed calls from Diane Park, who had apparently been awake, and 1 text that said, I am watching your board portal. I have no idea what is happening. Please call me immediately. She called Diane. The call lasted 4 minutes and was, as Lucas had predicted, not a gentle conversation. Diane Park was a corporate attorney who had been with Whitmore Logistics for 6 years and who considered herself the person who should be called first in any situation involving legal risk, and who had specifically said this to Claire on multiple occasions, and who was now learning that her client had navigated an evening of corporate sabotage, federal investigation, and emergency board action with a maintenance worker and without calling her until 3 in the morning. I was going to call you earlier, Claire said. When? During the board session you held without legal counsel present? Elaine had counsel present on her end. That is not, Claire, that is not the same thing, and you know it. I know. I'm sorry, Diane. Are you physically safe? Yes. Is everyone in that building accounted for? Federal investigators are on site. A pause. Okay, Diane said, with the specific exhale of a lawyer resetting from alarm to function. Okay, I'm coming in. Don't let anyone leave that building without me present. Holloway can't leave anyway. He's locked in a conference room. A longer pause. I'll be there in 20 minutes, Diane said. Claire ended the call and looked at Lucas. She's coming in, she said. I heard. She's going to want to talk to you. I figured. She's going to have a lot of questions about the building system's access and the recordings and the legal basis for, I know, he said. He wasn't bothered by it. He had the quality, she'd noticed, of being bothered by very few things. Not because he didn't feel them, but because he had a system for processing things that kept them from interfering with the next required action. She wondered briefly whether that was something you were born with or something that got built into you by specific experiences, and she suspected it was the second thing, and she suspected the building process had not been comfortable. Lucas, she said, the plan for upstairs. Del Vecchio's team makes entry into the conference room first, he said. The lockdown releases on her signal. Her team secures Holloway and his associates. We're present as witnesses and to facilitate access. We don't go in ahead of them. And if something goes wrong, define wrong. If Holloway does something unexpected, if there are weapons in that room we don't know about, if one of his men, then Del Vecchio's team handles it, he said. That's what they're there for. And if they can't handle it fast enough. He met her eyes. Then I handle it, he said simply. But they will. She nodded. She believed him on both counts. Her phone buzzed. A text from Del Vecchio. Team in position on 42. Ready when you are. That's us, Lucas said. He was already standing. The 42nd floor looked different with federal agents on it. Not dramatically different. The same dim corridor, the same rain-streaked windows, the same ambient glow of exit signs. But there were now 8 people distributed along the hallway in a pattern that made the space feel occupied in a specific, purposeful way. Del Vecchio was positioned near the elevator bank with 2 agents beside her. 2 more were at the south end of the corridor. 2 others flanked the conference room, close to the wall, out of the direct line of sight through the glass panels. The conference room itself was still lit. Holloway was standing now, and even from the elevator bank, Claire could see that his composure had developed cracks. Not visible in any single thing, but in the aggregate of his posture, the angle of his jaw, the way he was holding his phone like it was a problem he kept expecting to solve and kept failing to. Del Vecchio met them at the elevator. 2 men in that room besides Holloway, she confirmed, looking at Lucas. Both have moved to the door side. They've been working on the door mechanism for the last 20 minutes. They won't get it from the inside, Lucas said. I know that, but it tells me they're going to make a move the moment that door opens. She looked at her team. Standard entry, non-negotiable perimeter, verbal command first. Hayes? She looked at him with the specific regard of someone who had read a file on a person and was now reconciling it with the person in front of her. You stay back unless I tell you otherwise. Understood. She looked at Claire. Ms. Whitmore, once entry is made, you do not come through that door until I clear it. Confirmed? Confirmed. Del Vecchio turned to Lucas. Release on my mark. He pulled out his phone and brought up the building systems interface, his thumb over the lockdown release for the North Conference Room. He was still, the way he'd been still all night. Not tense, not performative, just the stillness of someone who has reduced themselves to the task. Del Vecchio moved to the conference room door, her team positioned. She looked back once at Lucas. Mark, she said. Lucas released the lockdown. The sound was subtle. A mechanical disengagement inside the walls, a shift in the pressure of the door frame. Del Vecchio pressed the handle and the door opened and she was inside before Holloway's men had fully processed that the door was no longer sealed. Claire stood in the corridor and watched through the glass. It was not like the service corridor. Del Vecchio's team moved with a different language than the men who had been waiting for Claire 3 hours ago. This was federal authority with specific training behind it, and the 2 men who had been working on the door and who now moved toward the opening found themselves out of options inside of 6 seconds. Not because the agents were faster, necessarily, but because the agents were coordinated and expected, and the 2 men in that room had been locked up for 90 minutes and were working from a diminished position. The voices were muffled through the glass, but audible. Federal agents. Hands where I can see them. Don't. And then the sound of compliance that isn't quite willing but is practical enough. Holloway did not move toward the door. He stood where he had been standing and he watched his 2 men get taken to the floor with controlled efficiency, and he held his phone and he was, in that moment, simply a man in a room with no more good options. Delvecchio crossed to him. Claire couldn't hear what was said, but she watched Holloway's face through the glass as Delvecchio spoke. Whatever she was saying, probably the thing federal investigators say when they make an arrest, the formal language of the law wrapping itself around a situation. Holloway received it with his eyes on Delvecchio and a jaw that was working to stay still. He looked through the glass then, directly at Claire. It was a strange moment. He looked at her across 30 feet of corporate carpeting and conference room glass, and his expression went through something she couldn't entirely read. Not remorse. She doubted Damian Holloway had arrived at remorse yet, if he ever would. Something more like a recalculation. A man updating his model of how a situation had gone. Then Delvecchio said something else, and Holloway broke the look and turned his attention back to the room. Delvecchio came to the door. "It's clear," she said to Claire. Claire walked in. She had been in this conference room hundreds of times. She'd run strategy sessions here, held difficult conversations with underperforming division heads, sat across the table from vendors and partners and people who wanted things from her company and had to be convinced on her terms. It was a room she knew, in the way you know rooms you've spent years of your professional life in. The particular quality of the light, the slight echo off the windows, the way the table's surface reflected the overhead lighting. Walking into it now felt completely different. It felt like walking into somewhere she'd had to earn back. Holloway was standing near the far window with an agent beside him. He looked at her when she came in, and this time the look was different, stripped of the conference room authority she'd seen across a dinner table on Michigan Avenue, stripped of the specific confidence of a man who believes he has already won. "Miss Whitmore?" he said. "Mr. Holloway." There was a beat between them. She didn't feel it. "This is going to be complicated," he said. "Legally, you understand that. Whatever you think you have, I have 14 months of documentation," she said. "Payment records, wire transfers, internal communications, and audio recordings. I have a federal investigation that has been running parallel to yours for 6 weeks." She paused. "And I have a unanimous board resolution confirming my executive authority, time-stamped at 2:43 this morning." He looked at her. Something shifted in his face that might have been the beginning of a more honest reckoning, or might have been nothing more than the adjustment of a man moving from one strategy to the next. "You're going to tell me this wasn't personal," she said. He said nothing. "It was personal," she said. "You came after something I built because I wouldn't sell it to you when you asked, and you thought that if you couldn't buy it, you'd take it. And you were wrong." She kept her voice level. Not hard, not heated, just clear, the way you speak when the thing you're saying doesn't need to borrow weight from your tone. "That's what this is." Holloway held her look, and then he looked away, out through the windows at the Chicago skyline in the rain. "I want my attorney," he said. "Agent Delvecchio will facilitate that," Claire said. She turned and walked back out. Lucas was in the corridor where she'd left him, leaning against the wall outside the conference room. He watched her come out, and he read something in her face. Whatever had happened in there, the residue of it. And he didn't ask. He just looked at her with that specific attention and waited. "It's done," she said. "In there, I mean. The rest is going to take a while." "Yeah," he said. "Weeks, maybe months. You'll get through it. I know." She looked at the conference room through the glass where Delvecchio's team was processing the scene with methodical efficiency. "It's just—" She stopped. "Yeah," he said, quieter. It was the right response to the unfinished sentence. She appreciated that he didn't need her to finish it. From the stairwell at the end of the corridor came the sound of the door opening, and then the sound of voices. One of them sharp, familiar, carrying the specific energy of a person who has been awake since a phone call woke them and has been running on adrenaline and professional indignation ever since. Diane Park came around the corner in a coat over what appeared to be pajama pants, her legal bag over one shoulder, her eyes conducting a rapid sweep of the situation that covered the conference room, the federal agents, Claire and Lucas, in about 2 seconds. "Claire," she said. "Diane, thank you for coming." Diane looked at the conference room. "Is that Damian Holloway?" "Yes." "And the federal agents are Economic Crimes Task Force. Karen Delvecchio is the lead." Claire gestured toward the conference room. "She'll want to talk to you." Diane set her bag on her shoulder more firmly, which was apparently her version of rolling up her sleeves, and looked at Lucas. "You're the maintenance worker," she said. "Lucas Hayes," he said. "I have about 40 questions for you." "I know. Are you represented?" He looked at Claire. "I'll get him someone," Claire said. "Tonight, if Diane can recommend—" "I can recommend," Diane said, already pulling out her own phone. "Give me 5 minutes." She walked toward the conference room and intercepted Del Vecchio just outside the door. And within 30 seconds, the two of them were in a conversation that had the quality of two professionally capable women who have just discovered each other and are rapidly deciding how to be efficient about it. Lucas watched them. "Your lawyer's good," he said. "She's very good," Claire said. "She's also going to be billing me for the pajama pants." He almost laughed. Almost. Down the corridor, the elevator chimed. Del Vecchio's additional team arriving, more agents moving toward the stairwell where the two operatives from the south floors had already been secured and were now being transported. The building was filling with the organized activity of an investigation in its early hours, the specific kind of controlled motion that begins when something has broken open and needs to be cataloged before it settles. Claire's phone buzzed. A message from Elaine. "Board council wants a call at 8 this morning. You should sleep first if you can." "Well done, Claire." She looked at the message for a moment. Well done. 2 words, from a woman who said exactly what she meant and no more. She pocketed her phone. "What time is it?" Lucas asked. 3:40. "She's going to be up at 6:30, he said. He wasn't talking about Elaine. "Maya. She makes her own cereal now," he said. "She started about 3 weeks ago. She's very proud of it." A pause. "She uses too much milk, and she knows she uses too much milk, but she does it anyway." Claire looked at him. "You should go," she said. "I'm not leaving until—" Lucas. "Will see. Then she said it the way you say a name when you want it to carry something. "Del Vecchio has what she needs. Diane is here. The building is locked, and there are 8 federal agents on this floor." She looked at him steadily. "Go home." He stood with it for a moment. She could see the part of him that didn't want to, the same part that had spent 14 months checking every floor at midnight because it couldn't see a problem and walk away from it, the part that was built for staying. "Del Vecchio will need a statement from me," he said. "She can get it tomorrow. She got your contact information tonight. The building systems are still in lockdown mode for 3 of the stairwells. Show me how to release them," she said. "Right now. Walk me through it." He looked at her. "I can do this," she said. Not defensively, just as a fact. He pulled out his phone and stood beside her and walked her through the building system's interface. Each panel, each access point, the sequence for releasing stairwell locks, the override protocol for the mechanical room controls. It took 6 minutes. She asked 2 questions, which he answered, and by the end of it she had released 2 of the 3 stairwells herself and understood the 3rd. "The north stairwell stays locked until Del Vecchio authorizes the release on her end," he said. "I know." She handed him back his phone. "Go home, Lucas." He pocketed the phone. He looked at the conference room one more time, at Holloway visible through the glass, at Del Vecchio's team, at the controlled, methodical process of an operation wrapping itself around the thing that had come undone tonight. Then he looked at Claire. "I'll be available tomorrow," he said, "for whatever they need." "I know you will. But the maintenance log for this floor needs to be updated by Thursday." "Lucas." He stopped. "Maya," she said. He exhaled once, and then for the first time in the entire night, something in him actually released. Some load-bearing piece of the posture he'd been maintaining shifted. Not much, just enough to show that it had been held in place by intention and not by ease. "Yeah," he said. He picked up the clipboard from the junction box in the corridor where he'd set it down approximately 4.5 hours ago, when 3 men had been standing in a hallway they shouldn't have been in, and he had stepped out of a shadow and said 2 words. He walked to the elevator. Claire watched him go. The elevator arrived, and he stepped in and turned, and she was still watching. And he looked at her for a moment with that particular consideration she'd come to understand was just how he looked at things. The world processed through one extra step of thought before it got a response. The doors closed. She stood in the 42nd floor corridor of her own building, The building her father had started and that she had built into something, and she listened to the organized sounds of federal investigators doing their work, and her lawyer's voice carrying from inside the conference room, and the rain against the exterior glass, and the particular quiet that follows a door when it closes. She thought about 14 months. She thought about a man walking these corridors after midnight in a building logo jacket, while a 6-year-old girl slept at her grandmother's house and trusted the world the way 6-year-olds trust it, completely, without the information that makes trust complicated. She thought about the flash drive in her pocket. Then Diane Park came out of the conference room and said her name, and she turned, and the work of the morning began. Downstairs in the parking structure, a set of headlights came on, and a car pulled out into the Chicago rain and turned north toward a neighborhood where a grandmother's apartment had a window with pigeons outside it that nobody had looked up the winter migration of yet, and a little girl who used too much milk on her cereal, and a man who was going to get home in time to be there when she woke up. Some things you protect because they're valuable. Some things you protect because they're everything. The sun came up on a city that didn't know anything had happened. That was the strange part. The part Claire kept returning to in the days that followed, when the immediate emergency had given way to the long, grinding work of its aftermath. Chicago woke up on Thursday morning the way it always did. Traffic building on the expressways, coffee shops opening their doors. The lake doing whatever the lake did in the early hours when the city was still deciding what kind of day it wanted to be. 42 floors above street level, a federal investigation was cataloging evidence in a corporate conference room. In a county lockup on the west side, 7 men, including Damian Holloway, were being processed through a system that moved slowly and without drama, regardless of who you were or how expensive your suit had been 8 hours ago. And in a neighborhood on the north side, a maintenance technician was asleep in an apartment above a grandmother's unit, having come home at 4:15 in the morning and found Maya already awake on the couch, watching a nature documentary about migratory birds with the sound turned low, because she had woken up and known somehow that waiting was the right thing to do. He hadn't told her anything. He'd sat beside her on the couch, and she'd leaned into him the way she did, her small weight against his side, and he'd watched birds fly across a television screen and said nothing, and she'd said nothing, and that had been enough. Claire didn't sleep. She stayed in the building until 6 in the morning, working alongside Diane and Del Vecchio's team, answering questions and signing statements and walking investigators through the documentation in a sequence that Diane managed with the precise, defensive efficiency of a lawyer who was aware that every word her client said tonight could become part of a federal record and was determined to ensure that record was accurate, complete, and favorable. At 5:40, Del Vecchio found her in the hallway outside the mechanical room. Lucas's room, the one with the workbench and the camera feeds and the small stovetop percolator, and said, "I need to ask you something off the record." "Off the record means nothing in a federal investigation," Diane said, appearing from around the corner with the timing of someone who had developed a professional reflex for those 4 words. "Noted," Del Vecchio said. She looked at Claire. "Hayes, what's your read on him?" Claire looked at her. "You've had a file on him for 6 weeks. Files tell you what someone did. They don't always tell you who someone is." Claire thought about a man standing in a maintenance alcove with a clipboard, 2 words, and the willingness to step into a hallway he didn't have to step into. She thought about 14 months of overnight walks and a parallel investigation built in a room no one else knew existed, and coffee from a percolator in a library mug, and the specific quality of attention he gave to things. Not performing vigilance, just genuinely incapable of looking away from something that needed watching. "He's the most competent person I've ever been in a crisis with," she said, "and the least interested in what that costs him." Del Vecchio absorbed that. "He could have a career in this," she said. Not to Claire specifically, more to a thought she was working through. "He has a 6-year-old daughter and he wants a quiet life," Claire said. "I know." Del Vecchio put her hands in her jacket pockets. "That's what makes it complicated." She went back to the conference room. Claire stood in the doorway of the mechanical room and looked at the workbench and the camera feeds and the small evidence of a life someone had built inside the margins of another life. The way people sometimes do when they need to maintain 2 things at once and they're disciplined enough to keep them from collapsing into each other. She closed the door and went back to work. Marcus Webb was arrested at 9:17 Thursday morning, He hadn't run, which surprised some people and didn't surprise others. He had arrived at the building's security office on the 12th floor at his normal time, 8:45, and had found the office occupied by 2 federal agents who had been waiting for him since 7. He had looked at the agents, and then at the equipment, and then at the door, and he had done a calculation that took about 4 seconds, and then he had sat down in his own chair and said he wanted to call his attorney. Claire was in her office when she got the notification. She was on her 3rd cup of coffee and her 2nd wind, which was the specific kind of energy that comes when your body has decided sleep is no longer an option and makes the best of what it has. She read the notification from Diane, Webb, in custody. 12th floor. No incident, and she set her phone down and looked out the window at the lake. 7 years. She thought about what Lucas had said, about people finding where their line is. She tried to locate something in herself that felt like understanding for how a person gets from 7 years of loyal service to the decision Marcus had made, and she found she could get partway there. She could see the shape of a reasoning process, the way someone rationalizes the first step as survivable, and then finds that the first step requires a second, but the endpoint remained somewhere she couldn't quite reach. Maybe she didn't need to reach it. Maybe understanding wasn't what the situation required from her. What it required was a deposition, which she gave at 10 o'clock in a conference room on the 38th floor, with Diane beside her and a federal stenographer across the table, and Karen Del Vecchio asking questions in the patient, unhurried way of someone who already knows most of the answers and is building a record. It took 3 hours. When it was over, Diane walked her to the elevator and said, "Go home. I mean it. I will handle everything that happens in the next 6 hours." The Vantage merger is not happening today. Vantage is aware there's been an incident and their counsel has already called me and they are prepared to extend the window. They want this deal, Claire. A 2-week extension isn't going to kill it. A 2-week extension means Holloway's attorneys have time to file a temporary injunction. Holloway's attorneys have their hands full, Diane said. Federal fraud charges, conspiracy, 3 counts of corporate sabotage. An injunction is not their first priority today. She pressed the elevator button. "Go home, sleep, come back tomorrow." The elevator arrived. "The men in the service corridor," Claire said. "The 3 Lucas, 2 have been treated and released into federal custody. 1 has a dislocated shoulder that required a hospital visit. He is also in federal custody." Diane's expression was precisely neutral. "Mr. Hayes appears to have been quite efficient." "He was," Claire said. The elevator doors opened. "Claire." Diane put a hand on her arm briefly. An unusual gesture from a woman whose professional style ran toward the verbal rather than the physical. "You did well tonight. You made good decisions under bad circumstances, and you had good help." She released her arm. "Go home." Claire went home. Tamiz. She slept for 6 hours and woke up at 7:30 Friday morning with the specific disorientation of a person who has slept in the wrong portion of the day. The light outside wrong for the feeling of where sleep had left her. She lay in her apartment, a clean, expensive place on the Gold Coast that she had bought 3 years ago and still hadn't entirely figured out how to make feel lived in, and looked at the ceiling and ran through the previous 40 hours in her head the way you run through something difficult when you finally have the stillness to do it properly. The company was intact. The board had acted. Federal investigators had the documentation. Holloway was in custody. Marcus was in custody. The Vantage merger was extended, not canceled. These were the facts, arranged in a row. She held them. Then she got up and made coffee and called Elaine Marsh. "You slept," Elaine said. Not a question. She could apparently tell from something in Claire's voice. 6 hours. "Good. How are you?" "I'm not sure yet," Claire said. "I'll know more in a week." "That's honest." A pause. "The board wants to schedule a formal session for Monday. Full debrief, official documentation of the emergency session, formal review of security protocols." "Of course." "And Claire, there's going to be a conversation about what comes next, not just operationally, about the structure of the company's governance, the security framework, who has access to what and under what conditions." "I know." "Some of that conversation is going to be uncomfortable. Callow and Vane are going to have to resign. They're not going to do it gracefully." "Let them be uncomfortable," Claire said. Elaine made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Yes, let them. Another pause. What about Hayes? Claire looked out at her kitchen window at the lake. It was overcast, the water a flat gray-green under the same clouds that had been sitting on the city since Wednesday night. I've been thinking about that, she said. So have I, Elaine said. A man who spent 14 months protecting this company without being asked, who built an intelligence operation in a room we didn't know existed, who has the training and judgment to… She stopped. I want to say we should find a place for him. But that's my read from the outside. You spent the night with him. He wants a quiet life, Claire said. He's been very clear about that. People can want a quiet life and still need work that's worthy of them. I know. Claire held her coffee mug. I'm going to talk to him when the timing is right. Don't wait too long, Elaine said. Men like that have a way of disappearing when you're not looking. The week that followed was not quiet, and it was not easy, and it did not resolve itself into anything clean. The federal investigation expanded in the way large investigations do, outward, finding connections that nobody had mapped yet, pulling threads that led to other threads. By Friday afternoon, Del Vecchio's team had identified 2 additional shell companies beyond what the flash drive had documented, both of them connected to a broader network of Holloway's acquisitions that were now under scrutiny. The scope of what he'd been doing, not just at Whitmore, but across 4 other infrastructure companies over the past 3 years, was larger than anyone had initially understood, and the federal case that was building around it was correspondingly significant. This was, in practical terms, good news for Claire and difficult news for her schedule. She spent most of Friday and all of Saturday in meetings with Diane and federal counsel, working through the implications of a case that kept growing at its edges while she was trying to manage the core of it. She gave 2 additional depositions. She reviewed document requests. She sat across a table from a federal prosecutor named Alan Reese, who was 38 and precise and not particularly impressed by anything except accuracy, and she gave him accuracy for 4 hours. On Saturday evening, Diane called her at home and said, Reese wants to know if you'd be willing to cooperate as a witness in the broader case. Not just Whitmore, the full Holloway portfolio investigation. What does that mean in practice? It means a longer involvement, more depositions, potentially testimony. It could run 18 months. Claire was quiet for a moment. I'll do it, she said. You don't have to decide tonight. I know. I'll do it. Diane was quiet for a beat. All right. Is there anything else? Webb is cooperating, Diane said. He reached an agreement with prosecutors this afternoon. In exchange for a full account of his involvement, they're recommending a reduced charge. Claire looked at her kitchen ceiling. What did he say? She asked. What was his reason? Diane paused. His mother's medical bills, she said. She's been in long-term care for 2 years. He's been covering the gap between what insurance pays and what the facility costs. A pause. He said he told himself it was temporary, that he'd find another way out of it before anything happened. Claire sat with that. It didn't change what Marcus had done. The damage was the same, the betrayal was the same, the 7 years of built trust that had become a tool in someone else's hands was the same. But it gave the shape of a person back to someone she'd spent the week trying to understand only as a fact. And that was uncomfortable in a specific way that she thought probably needed to be uncomfortable. Thank you for telling me, she said. I thought you should know. Diane paused. Go to sleep, Claire. Monday's board meeting is going to be long. It was. The Monday board session ran from 9 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon, with a 40-minute break for lunch that most people didn't take. Elaine ran it with the same controlled precision she'd brought to the 2:15 emergency session, but this time the room was physically full. 10 board members, company counsel, federal liaison counsel, and Claire at the head of the table in a suit she'd chosen because it was the one her father had liked. A charcoal gray that he'd said once made her look like someone who knew what she was doing even when she didn't. Richard Callow resigned at 10:42, in writing, through his attorney, without appearing in person. His letter was 2 paragraphs and contained no acknowledgement of what had occurred, just the standard language of a board departure, retirement from public service, gratitude for the opportunity. Claire read it once and passed it to Diane and didn't think about it again. Peter Vane appeared in person, which surprised her. He sat at the far end of the table with his attorney beside him. and his face doing something complicated that she read as a man in the process of understanding the full dimensions of a situation he had thought was smaller than it was. His resignation was verbal, then confirmed in writing, and when the formalities were done, he looked at Claire across the length of the table with an expression she didn't have a clean name for. "I'm sorry, Claire," he said. She looked at him. "I know that doesn't—" He stopped, started again. "I know it doesn't help anything." "No?" she said. "It doesn't." He nodded. He and his attorney left the room. The work continued. By 3 in the afternoon, the board had formally adopted 12 governance reforms: enhanced oversight protocols, separation of security authority from executive reporting lines, mandatory independent audits on a quarterly basis, a new framework for external access and contractor vetting. Some of it was overdue. Some of it was new thinking generated by the specific ways the conspiracy had exploited existing gaps. All of it had been drafted by Diane and a governance specialist the board had retained over the weekend, and all of it was unanimous. At 3:40, Elaine called a brief recess and found Claire in the hallway outside the boardroom with a cup of coffee that had gone cold while she was reviewing a document. "You're doing well," Elaine said. "I'm functioning," Claire said. "At this point, that's doing well." Elaine looked at her with the frank attention of someone who has known a person through multiple difficult seasons and has opinions about what they're seeing. "What's going on with Hayes? Have you spoken to him?" "He gave his statement to federal investigators Friday morning," Claire said. "Diane was present. It went fine." She paused. "I haven't spoken to him personally." "Why not?" She thought about it honestly. "Because I'm not sure what to say," she admitted. "I know what I want to offer him professionally. But every time I think about how to start that conversation, it feels like it's carrying too much weight, like anything I say is going to land wrong relative to what he did." Elaine looked at her for a moment. "He spent 14 months watching your company," she said. "He didn't need a perfect approach from you. He just needed you to look." Claire looked at her. "Go see him," Elaine said. "Not tonight, but soon." She went on Wednesday. She didn't call ahead. It occurred to her that she had his number. Diane had collected it, but calling felt like a thing that would let him prepare, and she didn't want him to prepare. She wanted to see him in whatever version of the day he was actually in. She knew from the building's employee records that his shift on Wednesdays started at noon. At 11:15, she went to the maintenance scheduling office on the 9th floor and found a department manager named Bill Ostrowski, who had been Lucas's direct supervisor for 14 months. And who looked at Claire with the expression of a man trying to understand why the CEO of the company was personally visiting his department. "Mr. Ostrowski," she said. "Lucas Hayes." "Yeah." Ostrowski was a heavy-set man in his late 50s with the deliberate, unimpressed manner of someone who has supervised large numbers of people for long enough to find most things unsurprising. "Hell of a week for him." "What do you mean?" "Federal agents in my department, interviewing my people, pulling his personnel file." He shrugged. "Guys talk. Everybody knows something happened." He looked at her. "I still don't know exactly what happened, but I know Hayes was in the middle of it." "He was," Claire said. "Is he in trouble?" "No," she said. "The opposite." Ostrowski looked at her for a moment. "He's a good worker," he said. "Best I've had on the upper floors. Never complains, never misses a shift, does the job right the first time." He paused. "I always figured there was more to him than he said, the way he knew the building. Nobody knows a building like that their first year. You learn it that fast, you've been paying close attention to something." "He was," Claire said. "What do you need from me?" "I just need to know where he is right now." Ostrowski checked a scheduling board on his wall, an actual physical board with names and floors written in marker, the kind of analog system that exists in every large building regardless of how much software the building also has. 36th floor mechanical inspection, he said. "He started at 7 this morning, early shift this week." "Thank you." She took the stairs to 36. She found him in a mechanical room on the north end of the floor, a real one, the kind that actually contained building systems rather than a parallel life built in the margins. He was checking a pressure gauge on an HVAC unit with a tablet in his other hand, logging readings with the same focused attention he gave to everything. The world processed through one extra step before it got a response. He heard her come in and turned. The bruise on his jaw had moved through its colors and was now in the faded yellow-green phase of the final stage. He looked like he'd slept. He was wearing the same kind of dark work pants and building logo jacket, the same field watch worn on the inside of his wrist, the same quality of being exactly where he was, without apology or performance. "Ms. Whitmore," he said. "It's Claire," she said. "After everything, it's definitely Claire." He nodded once. He set the tablet on top of the HVAC unit and waited with that particular patience she'd come to understand was just how he waited. She came into the room and stood near the door. "How's Maya?" she asked. Something in his face shifted, not toward warmth exactly, more like the removal of a layer of professional neutrality that he maintained in default settings. "She's good," he said. "I came home Thursday morning and she was watching birds on TV at 4 in the morning. Did you tell her anything about that night?" "I told her I'd had a complicated work night and that everything was fine," he paused. "She asked me if I'd fixed a big elevator." "What did you say?" "I said something like that, yeah." Claire almost smiled. She crossed her arms and looked at the HVAC unit, the tablet, the organized space of a person who works the same way in every context. "Lucas," she said, "I've been trying to figure out how to have this conversation since Thursday." "I know," he said. "You know?" "You were going to offer me something," he said, "and you weren't sure how to do it without it coming out wrong." He said it without any smugness, just as an observation about a situation he'd had enough time to think about. "Am I that readable?" "You're not unreadable," he said. "I've just been paying attention." She looked at him. "I want to offer you the position of Director of Strategic Security," she said. "It's a new position. It didn't exist before Monday. The board approved it as part of the governance reforms. It would mean a significant salary increase, direct reporting to me, authority over internal security architecture, and external threat assessment." She paused. "No mandatory public profile. No press. No external visibility requirements of any kind." He was quiet. "I thought about what you'd need," she said. "The anonymity was non-negotiable for me to get right. The board agreed." "Oh, that fast," he said. "I had 3 days to prepare." He looked at the tablet on the HVAC unit. He looked at the gauge he'd been reading when she walked in. He looked at something she couldn't see that was probably the calculation he ran before every decision, the one that went through Maya first and then everything else. "It's not a quiet life," he said. "No," she said. "It's not. It involves being visible to people inside the company. Yes, deliberately limited, but yes." "And what happened last week? That kind of thing. Is that going to be a regular feature of this job, or was that—" "I hope it's a once-in-a-career event," she said honestly, "but I can't promise you the job is without risk. It's a security role. The risk is inherent." She held his gaze. "What I can promise you is that I would never put you in a position without giving you full information. What I can promise you is that the decisions about how you operate would be yours. And what I can promise you is that Maya's stability is something I will personally protect as a condition of your employment, because without it, nothing else makes sense." He looked at her for a long moment. "That last part," he said. "You didn't have to say that." "I know, that's why I said it." He picked up the tablet. He looked at the gauge reading and typed something and set it down again. She let him have the gesture, whatever he needed to do with his hands while he thought. "I'm going to need to talk to Maya's grandmother," he said, "about schedule, about what it means for pickup and drop-off." "Of course. And I want it in writing that my operational decisions don't go through any committee. I report to you, and that's the structure." "Already in the offer letter," she said. He looked at her. "You wrote an offer letter already." "I wrote it Saturday," she said. "Diane reviewed it Sunday. It's been ready since Monday morning." He looked at her with that specific quality of attention, the extra step before the response. And then finally, something that was not quite a smile, but was the closest she had seen him get to one without it falling back into his face. "One more condition," he said. "Name it." "The room on 42, he said. "The mechanical room. I want to keep access to it." She thought about the workbench and the camera feeds and the percolator and the library mug. "It's yours," she said. He nodded. He picked up his tablet and shut down the readings and tucked the tablet under his arm. Then he extended his hand. She shook it. It was not a dramatic moment. It was a man and a woman in a mechanical room on the 36th floor of a building at 11:27 in the morning, shaking hands over a decision that had taken 10 minutes to arrive at and 14 months to earn. The HVAC unit hummed. The building did what buildings do, indifferent and continuous. "When do you want me to start?" he asked. "There's no rush," she said. "Take a week. Get Maya settled with the new schedule." He shook his head. "Monday's fine." "Lucas, I said Monday," he said, not with force, just with the directness of a person who knows how he functions and doesn't see the use in padding it. "I don't do well with unstructured time. It gives me too much room to second-guess things." She looked at him. "Monday," she said. "Monday," he confirmed. He moved toward the door. She stepped aside to let him pass, and he stopped in the doorway, half in and half out of the mechanical room. "Claire," he said. "Yeah." "The offer letter." He looked at her. "The part about Maya's stability. I know you meant it, but you should know—" He paused. "That's not something anyone said to me before, in any professional context, or most personal ones." She held his look. "Then it was overdue," she said. He held it a moment longer. Then he nodded once and went back into the hallway, and she could hear his footsteps on the floor as he moved toward the elevator. The same even pace, the same absence of hurry or performance, just a person going from one place to the next because there was work to be done. She stood in the mechanical room for a moment after he left. She thought about her father, who had said once, she'd been maybe 14, watching him manage a conflict between two warehouse supervisors with the kind of patience that looked effortless from the outside, that the most important thing in a business is knowing who you can trust and being worth their trust in return. She'd thought she understood that at 14. She thought she'd understood it at 27 when she took over the company. She thought she'd understood it at 30, a week ago, when she'd found a flash drive on her office floor. She understood it differently now. She took the elevator back up to 42. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that was not normal. Normal was somewhere further out, still being reassembled from its components, but was functional. Claire worked. The company worked. The Vantage merger window was extended and then extended again by mutual agreement, while federal proceedings generated the kind of legal complexity that made acquisition due diligence teams nervous. And while Claire's counsel managed those nerves with the patient, document-heavy reassurance of people who had done this before. Del Vecchio's investigation expanded into what the Chicago Tribune, which picked up the story on Thursday afternoon through a source that was never identified, described as one of the most sophisticated corporate fraud conspiracies uncovered in the Midwest in a decade. Claire's name appeared in the story, which she'd expected and had prepared for. Lucas's name did not, which she had specifically worked to ensure and which Del Vecchio had accommodated with the understanding that a cooperating witness's security interests were a legitimate federal concern. Damian Holloway's bail was denied at a Friday hearing. His attorney argued that his client was a legitimate businessman who had been misrepresented by a motivated adversary, and the federal judge looked at the documentation with the unhurried attention of someone who had been doing this job for 20 years and said bail denied with the particular quietness of someone who didn't feel the need to elaborate. Claire heard about this from Diane by text at 11:30 Friday morning. She read the message, set her phone down, and went back to the quarterly report she'd been reviewing. There was nothing in her to celebrate it. It was not a celebration, it was an outcome. But something in her chest that had been held in a particular tension since Wednesday night of the previous week released a small amount of pressure, and she noticed that and let it count for what it was. Marcus Webb's preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following month. His cooperation agreement was in place. Claire would be a witness in that proceeding too, and she was not looking forward to it in any version of that phrase, but she would be there and she would be accurate, because accuracy was what the situation required, and it was what her father's company deserved. On Friday afternoon, Elaine Marsh stopped by her office without an appointment, something Elaine did almost never, preferring the structure of scheduled communication, and sat down in the chair across from Claire's desk with the expression of someone who has been thinking about something for several days and has decided to stop thinking about it and say it instead. "The board is grateful," Elaine said. "I want to say that plainly because I don't think I said it plainly enough at the Monday session." "You said it well at the Monday session," Claire said. "I said it procedurally," Elaine said. "There's a difference." She folded her hands in her lap. What happened last week was serious, and you handled it with a quality of judgment that I've been on this board for 11 years, and I don't always see. She paused. Your father would have been proud of you. Claire looked at her. I know that's a thing people say, Elaine said. I'm saying it because it's true. Claire's throat did something she didn't entirely manage, but she kept her face still enough. Thank you, Elaine, she said. Don't get sentimental, Elaine said, standing up. We have a merger to close. She left. Claire sat at her desk for a moment in the quiet office, the lake visible through the window, the city doing what it always did, regardless of what happened on any particular floor of any particular building, and she held the week in her hands the way you hold something before you set it down for good. On the corner of her desk was the flash drive. She'd kept it. She knew the irrationality of it. It was evidence in a federal case, and she'd given the original contents to every relevant party. But she had a copy, and she'd kept the drive itself as a thing she couldn't quite articulate the reason for keeping, except that it was the object that had started everything. A small, black, unremarkable thing that some man had left on her floor in the middle of a night when the world was trying to close in on her, and which had turned out to be the hinge that everything else turned on. She picked it up and put it in her desk drawer and closed the drawer. Then she picked up her phone and sent a text to Lucas. Monday, 8 a.m. Come to my office first. We'll do a building walkthrough together. The response came 11 minutes later. Okay, Maya wants to know if the pigeons in this building are the same ones from our window. She read it once and then again. She typed back, I'll find out. Give me the weekend. She set her phone down and looked out at the lake. The clouds had finally moved off. The water was the particular hard blue of a late autumn afternoon, when the sun is low and the light has an edge to it, and the city spread out below the window like it always had, indifferent and enormous, and going about its business. She went back to work. Monday came the way Mondays always do, without ceremony, indifferent to everything that had happened in the days before it. Lucas arrived at 7:53, which was 7 minutes early, which was probably not a coincidence. He came through the main lobby entrance rather than the service entrance, which was new, and the lobby security team, a crew that had been restructured over the weekend under Diane's oversight while Del Vecchio's investigators completed their sweep of Marcus Webb's operational records, looked at his badge, looked at him, and waved him through with the slightly uncertain energy of people who had been told that a maintenance technician was now a senior executive and were in the process of updating their mental categories. He was wearing the same kind of dark work pants, different jacket, no building logo, just a plain dark jacket that sat on him the way clothes sit on people who don't think about clothes. He was carrying a cup of coffee from the place on the corner, not the percolator in the mechanical room, which Claire noted when he came through her office door at 8:02 and sat in the chair across from her desk. You're almost on time, she said. Traffic, he said. You don't drive. I take the train. There was a delay at Fullerton. He looked around her office with the same systematic attention he gave to every space, assessing, cataloging, filing. She'd noticed that he did this every time he entered a room he'd been in before, a brief refresh of the environment, the way you check a space for things that have changed. What are you looking for? She asked. Nothing specific, he said. It's just how I look at rooms. Does anything look different? Your desk is cleaner than it was the night I put the drive there, he said. The credenza on the left, you've moved something. There used to be a framed photo on the right end. She looked at the credenza. I moved it to the windowsill. Why? Because it faces the lake from there, she said. My father liked the lake. He nodded once and didn't press it, which she appreciated. She had thought about this meeting for 5 days. She had made notes, which she then decided not to use, and then made different notes, which she also decided not to use. What she'd arrived at was the understanding that the only way to do this correctly was to simply do it, without architecture. Because Lucas Hayes was a person who could detect the architecture of a conversation from the outside, and she didn't want him detecting it. Before we do the walkthrough, she said, I want to say something. He held his coffee and waited. I've been thinking about what you did, she said. Not the tactical part, not the night itself, although that too, but the 14 months before it. The decision to stay and watch when you could have walked away. The decision to build something in that room and keep building it, night after night, for a year and a half, without anyone knowing and without anyone asking you to. She paused. I've tried to understand what that costs a person, she said, and I don't think I can, fully. But I want you to know that I've tried to understand it, and I know it costs something, and I know it was yours to give, and you gave it anyway. Lucas looked at his coffee cup for a moment. You don't owe me a speech, he said. I know, this isn't a speech, it's just, I wanted to say it before we made it official, and put it in a title and a salary, and turned it into a professional arrangement. She held his look. Because what it was, before all of that, was something else, something I don't have the right word for. He was quiet for a moment. My team, he said, the ones we lost. I spent a long time thinking about what I could have done differently, whether different decisions would have changed the outcome, whether the intelligence we had was always going to be wrong, or whether there was something I missed that I should have caught. He looked at her. You don't stop being the kind of person who watches for things. You either find somewhere to put it, or it goes somewhere bad. A pause. I found somewhere to put it. This building, she said. Maya needed stability. The building needed someone paying attention. It worked out. You make it sound simple. It wasn't simple, he said, but the logic of it was. She looked at him. Okay, she said, let's do the walkthrough. They started on the lobby level and worked their way up, which was the opposite of the direction most people would assume a security review would go. You'd think you'd start at the top, with the executive suite, with the highest value targets. Lucas started at the bottom because, as he explained in the elevator, security failures almost always enter from the bottom and work their way up. The loading dock, the service entrances, the parking structure access points, the lobby desk protocols, the badge reader calibration on the employee entrance. By the time you're worrying about the 42nd floor, something has already gotten past the ground level. Claire listened and took notes on her phone. It took 4 hours. By the time they reached the executive floor, she had 3 pages of observations, 8 immediate action items, and a significantly revised understanding of how many things about her building's security she had assumed were functioning at a level they were not functioning at. Not because Marcus Webb had sabotaged them, though some of what she'd learned about his tenure would require a separate audit, but because the ordinary entropy of institutional security meant that systems assumed to work were often working at 60 or 70% of intended capacity, and the gap between assumption and reality was exactly the kind of space that sophisticated bad actors found and used. How do you see all of this? She asked, standing in the service corridor on 38, the same corridor that connected to the vertical utility chase, the same stretch of buildings she'd climbed through in her stocking feet 10 days ago. The gaps, how do you identify them that quickly? I look for what's not there, he said. Security people tend to look for threats. I look for the absence of deterrence, the camera that points at the wrong angle, the door that has a badge reader but no log review protocol, the shift change that takes 12 minutes instead of 5. He glanced at her. Threats adapt to whatever deterrence exists, but the absence of deterrence doesn't adapt, it just sits there. You taught yourself this. Navy taught me the principles, he said. I applied them here. Did it occur to you at any point in the 14 months to apply them somewhere more, I don't know, lucrative? Sure, he said. And? Maya's school is 4 blocks from the building, he said. Her grandmother's place is 6 blocks north. I know the names of the other kids in her class and which parents let their kids walk home and which ones don't. He looked at the corridor. Lucrative isn't the only metric. She held that. Lucrative isn't the only metric, she said. That should be on a wall somewhere. Please don't put it on a wall. I'm not going to put it on a wall. People put things on walls in corporate offices, he said. Motivational things. It's a whole industry. I know, I've never done it. Good. I do have one frame thing, she said. My father's first logistics contract, 1991. 1 truck, 1 route, $12,000. He looked at her. Now you have 800 million, he said. Almost, she said. Still 11 days. He almost smiled. This time it made it further than usual. The Vantage merger closed on a Tuesday, 17 days after it was supposed to, in a conference room that was not the North Conference Room on 42, That room had been deep cleaned and would eventually return to normal function, but Claire had quietly scheduled all significant meetings elsewhere for the foreseeable future, and nobody on her team had asked why. The signing took 40 minutes. The Vantage team was led by their CEO, a 55-year-old man named Gerald Orth, who had the manner of someone who had been in rooms like this many times and found them pleasantly familiar. He shook Claire's hand at the beginning and at the end, and in between he was efficient and professional, and he signed where indicated. When it was done, he leaned back in his chair and said, "You had quite a week, from what I understand." "We did," Claire said. "I hope you know we weren't going anywhere," he said. "The extension. Some deals fall apart when the principal is distracted by all of this." He gestured vaguely. "We weren't walking." "I know," she said. "Thank you for that." "The company your father built," he said. "The company you built on top of it. That's what we're acquiring, not the drama around the edges." He paused. "My due diligence team said your operational infrastructure was the cleanest they'd reviewed in 3 years. That doesn't happen by accident." "No," she said. "It doesn't." He shook her hand again and left. Diane was across the table gathering documents, and when the Vantage team had filed out, she looked up at Claire with an expression that was as close to personal satisfaction as Diane Park ever displayed in a professional context. "Done," Diane said. "Done," Claire said. "Don't do anything celebratory that I haven't approved," Diane said. "I'm going to get lunch," Claire said. "Approved," Diane said. She brought lunch to the mechanical room on 42. She'd texted Lucas at 11. "Merger closed. Bringing food at 1. Don't argue." The response had come back in 4 minutes. "I wasn't going to argue." She came in with 2 bags from the Thai place 3 blocks north that she'd been ordering from since she moved into the CEO role, and which made a green curry that was, in her honest assessment, one of the better things about her professional life. She set the bags on Lucas's workbench, which was still his workbench, the camera feed still running on the 3 small screens, the percolator in its corner, the library mug washed and sitting beside it. And he moved the tablet he'd been working on and made space. He opened the container and looked at it. "Green curry," she said. "I can see that." "You don't like it?" "I've never had it," he said. "That's..." She stopped. "How have you never had green curry?" "I grew up in Indiana," he said. "We didn't have a lot of Thai restaurants." "What did you eat?" "Whatever my grandmother made," he said. "Pot roast mostly, corn, things that required no sophistication." "And in the Navy?" "Things that required no sophistication and also tasted worse." She sat on the stool and he pulled a chair from the corner, and they ate at the workbench with the camera feed cycling through the lobby and the parking structure and the service entrance. And outside the mechanical room, the building went about its business. 42 floors above the city that didn't know and didn't need to know about the specific weight of the last 3 weeks. He tried the curry and said nothing for a moment. "Well," she said. "It's good," he said. "I know it's good. You don't need my confirmation." "I wanted it anyway." He ate more of it. "Maya keeps asking when she can visit," he said between bites. "The elevator thing." "Bring her Saturday," Claire said. "The building is quieter on weekends. I'll come in for a few hours." "You don't have to come in on a Saturday." "I want to," she said. "I told you I would, and I want to meet her." She looked at him. "Is that okay?" He considered it in the way he considered things. "She's going to ask you a lot of questions," he said. "I'm looking forward to it." "She's going to ask you about the pigeons." "I did the research," Claire said. He stopped eating and looked at her. "You actually looked it up," he said. "You seemed concerned that you hadn't," she said. "I had a weekend. The pigeons outside your window are almost certainly common rock pigeons, which are non-migratory in urban environments. They stay year-round. She doesn't need to worry about where they go." He stared at her. "What?" she said. "You looked up the migration patterns of pigeons," he said. "I spent 45 minutes on it, if you want the full picture." Something happened in his face that she hadn't seen there before. Not the almost smile, not the quiet consideration, not the focused attention. Something warmer than all of those, and less guarded, and she thought it was probably the closest she was going to see to the version of him that existed at home on a Tuesday morning when nobody was watching. "She's gonna like you," he said. "Good," Claire said. "I already like her." They ate in the quiet of the room with the hum of the building around them, and at some point the conversation moved from pigeons to the security audit findings, and from there to the staff restructuring in the security department. And from there, circuitously, to the question of who Lucas was planning to hire as his second, because a director of strategic security with no staff was a structural problem that needed solving. "I have someone in mind," he said. "From the Navy? Former military, yes. She's been working private sector for 3 years, but she's been unhappy about it." He pulled out his phone and showed Claire a name and a brief summary of a service record that was, in the 2 paragraphs available, impressively dense with experience. "She?" Claire said. "Sergeant First Class Yolanda Briggs," he said. "Army, not Navy. Don't hold it against her." "Does she know buildings?" "She knows threat assessment, and she learns fast," he said. "Give her 6 months with the building, and she'll know it the way I do." "Set up a meeting," Claire said. "Already done," he said. "Thursday, if you're available." She looked at him. "You scheduled a meeting before I approved the hire," she said. "I scheduled a preliminary conversation," he said. "The meeting is tentative pending your availability." "That's a fine line." "I'm a precise person." She looked at him for a moment and then shook her head, not with annoyance, with something that was almost affection, the specific kind that develops between people who have been through something together and come out the other side with a functional understanding of who the other person is. "Thursday works," she said. "Maham." Yolanda Briggs was 36, medium height, with the economical presence of someone who had been trained to take up exactly as much space as a situation required and no more. She came to the Thursday meeting in a blazer over a dark shirt, and she shook Claire's hand with the direct firmness of someone who had decided that the handshake was an accurate first piece of information about a person and was offering accurate first information about herself. She sat across the table from Claire and beside Lucas, and she answered questions with a precision that occasionally surprised even Lucas, who knew her record, because there is a difference between knowing what someone has done and hearing how they describe what they've learned from it. "Why are you unhappy in private sector?" Claire asked. Briggs looked at her without hesitation. "Because private sector security is mostly liability management," she said. "It's about optics and insurance, and making sure the company can demonstrate due diligence if something goes wrong. It's not about actually preventing things from going wrong." A pause. "I'm better at the second thing." "What makes you think this position is different?" "Hayes told me what happened 3 weeks ago," she said. "Not the details that are under federal seal. The structural fact of it. That this building had an active intelligence operation running inside it for 14 months before it mattered, and that when it mattered, it worked." She looked at Claire. "That tells me this is a place where someone decided the second thing was worth doing. That's where I want to work." Claire looked at Lucas. He was looking at the table with the expression of someone being described accurately and finding it mildly uncomfortable. "She's always like this," he said. "I appreciate it," Claire said. She looked back at Briggs. "When can you start?" 2 weeks' notice to my current position," Briggs said. "Then whenever you need me." 3 weeks from Monday," Claire said. "Lucas will brief you on the building during your first week. By the end of week 2, I want your independent assessment of the security gaps he identified. Not confirmation, independent assessment." Briggs nodded. "I'll probably find different things." "That's the point," Claire said. After Briggs left, Lucas and Claire stood in the conference room for a moment in the aftermath of the meeting. That specific beat, where 2 people who've just made a decision together take a breath before the next thing. "She's good," Claire said. "She's better than good," he said. "She's also going to argue with me about methodology." "Is that a problem?" "No," he said. "It's necessary." He picked up his notepad. "She argued with me in the service for 6 months before we figured out how to work together. After that, we didn't lose people." He said it simply, the way he said things that mattered to him, without additional weight, just the fact laid down. She understood what he meant. "I'm glad you found her," she said. "She found me," he said. "She called 2 weeks ago. She said she'd heard I was doing something interesting." He paused. "I don't know how she heard. I haven't asked." "People talk," Claire said. "Apparently," he said. even when you try to keep things quiet. Saturday was clear. A hard, bright November morning with the lake the color of hammered steel and the city lit up under a sky that had finally given the rain a rest. Claire arrived at the building at 9 and went up to her office and made coffee and stood at the window and looked at the view her father had looked at when he first moved the company into this tower. The same city and the same lake and the same specific quality of Chicago winter light that is unforgiving and beautiful in equal measure. She thought about what the last 3 weeks had cost. Not the company. The company was intact. The merger was closed. The legal proceedings were in motion and would eventually resolve themselves in the way legal proceedings do, slowly and expensively and with occasional frustrations. Not the professional relationships, though those had shifted in ways that would take time to fully understand. She thought about what it had cost her personally, in the specific currency of things you believe about people and things you trust without verification, because trust without verification is both necessary and dangerous, and she had not yet fully reconciled herself to the ratio that life seemed to require. She thought about Marcus Webb, who was cooperating with federal prosecutors, and whose mother was still in the facility that his bad decision had been designed to pay for, and who would spend several years dealing with the legal and professional consequences of a choice that had probably felt, in the moment he made it, like the only available option. She didn't forgive him. She wasn't sure forgiveness was the right framework, but she thought about him with something that was at least the beginning of complexity, and she supposed that was more honest than nothing. She thought about her father and the flash drive in her desk drawer and the $12,000 contract in the frame on the windowsill, and she thought that what connected all of those things was something simpler than the word legacy implied, but harder than the word work implied. It was just the consistent application of attention. Paying attention to what was real, paying attention to what was right, paying attention to the people around you, not as instruments of your larger goals, but as people. Which sounds obvious until you watch how rarely it actually happens in the rooms where decisions get made. Her phone buzzed. A text from Lucas. Outside. She wants to know which floor the elevator goes to. She smiled, which was not a thing she'd done involuntarily in 3 weeks, and typed back, "All of them. Come up." Maya Hayes was, in person, exactly what her father's description had suggested, and also completely different from anything that description had prepared Claire for. She was small for 6, with her father's dark eyes and a seriousness of expression that would have looked more at home on someone twice her age if it weren't for the fact that it kept breaking open into a sudden, unguarded delight whenever something interested her, which was frequently. She was wearing a yellow jacket over a striped shirt, and she had her father's hand, and she walked into Claire's office and looked around at everything with the specific hunger of a child encountering a new environment and categorizing it. "It's very clean," Maya said. "Thank you," Claire said. "Our apartment has more stuff in it." "Maya," Lucas said. "That's okay," Claire said. "Clean is a professional choice. I can add stuff." Maya looked at the view out the window. She walked to it without asking permission, the way children move when they're genuinely focused on something, without social management, and pressed one hand against the glass and looked down at the city. "We're really high," she said. 42 floors, Claire said, coming to stand beside her. "Can you see our building?" "Which direction is it?" "North," Lucas said from behind them. He came to stand on Maya's other side. Claire looked north. "There's a cluster of mid-rise buildings about 6 blocks that way, the one with the green roof." Maya pressed her face closer to the glass and looked. "I see it," she said. Then, "I can see our window." "Can you?" Claire said. "No," Lucas said. "You can't see the actual window from here," Claire said gently, "but you can see the building." "That's enough," Maya said with the definitive quality of a 6-year-old who has decided that something is resolved. She turned from the window and looked at Claire with the direct assessment of a child who has not yet learned to look at people sideways. "My dad says you run the whole building," she said. "I run the company that's in the building," Claire said. "Your dad runs the building." Maya thought about this. She looked at Lucas. "Is that true?" she asked. "More or less," he said. "So you're both in charge," she said. "Something like that," Claire said. Maya seemed to find this satisfactory. She looked around the office again. "Where's the elevator?" she said. Claire showed her the elevator. She showed her the button panel. all 42 floors and the basement and the parking levels, and let Maya press the button for 41 and then the button for 42 again on the way back up. And Maya rode the elevator with the focused pleasure of someone experiencing a thing they've been thinking about for a while and finding it lives up to consideration. Then Maya asked about the pigeons. They were standing at the window again, all three of them, and Maya had been looking at the birds on the ledge of the building across from them. 3 pigeons huddled against the wind with the indifferent patience of birds that have made their peace with November. When she said, "Do those pigeons go away in winter?" "Rock pigeons don't migrate," Claire said. "They stay in cities year-round, so the ones outside your window will still be there in January." Maya looked at the pigeons across the way. "How do you know?" she said. "I looked it up," Claire said. Maya looked at her father. "She looked it up," she said, with the tone of someone who has just been given evidence in a long-running argument. "I know," Lucas said. "She told me." "You said you'd look it up." "I said I'd look into it," he said. "That means the same thing." "It doesn't always mean the same thing." Maya turned back to the window with the expression of someone who has made her point and is choosing to let it land rather than press it further. She watched the pigeons for a moment. "I'm glad they don't go away," she said. "Me too," Claire said. They stood at the window for a while, the 3 of them, looking out at a city that held them all in its ordinary morning. The traffic, the lake, the November light hitting the buildings at the angle it hit at this hour. The pigeons doing what pigeons do, which is exist without any particular concern for the significance of the things happening around them. At some point, Maya decided she wanted to see the very top of the building, and Claire took her and Lucas to the 43rd floor, which was a mechanical penthouse rather than anything scenic, but which had a window that looked straight up at the sky, and Maya stood under it and looked up at nothing but cloud and blue and said, very quietly, "Oh." Not performing wonder, just having it. Lucas stood beside Claire, and they both watched his daughter look at the sky through a window at the top of a building, and Claire thought that there was something in that image. The small girl in the yellow jacket, the upturned face, the specific quality of a child encountering the size of the world without fear, that she would hold on to for a very long time. Not because it was a lesson or a symbol or anything that reduced to a usable idea, but because some things are worth holding simply because they're real. She thought that her father would have liked this moment. He had believed, more firmly than most people she'd known, that the right reward for difficult work was not money or recognition, but the specific kind of morning where you can look at what you've built and feel that it was worth building. Not perfect. He'd never used that word, in all the years she'd watched him work. But real. Made of something that would last. She thought about the flash drive in her desk drawer, and Marcus Webb and Damian Holloway in federal custody, and the board session at 2:15 in the morning, and a granola bar eaten at a loading dock while headlights appeared in the rain. She thought about a clipboard set down on a junction box, and a maintenance jacket with a building logo, and 2 words spoken to 3 men in a corridor with the calm certainty of someone who had already calculated everything they needed to calculate. Wrong door. She thought about the fact that strength, in her experience now, the experience of a woman who had built something and nearly lost it and gotten it back, did not look the way she had always been taught to expect it to look. It did not look like confidence projected across a conference table or authority asserted in a room full of people who were already positioned to receive it. It did not announce itself, and it did not require an audience, and it did not need your recognition in order to keep functioning. It looked like a man who took the overnight shift so he could be home in the mornings. It looked like 14 months of paying attention to something nobody else was watching, building a record in a room no one knew existed, making the choice to step out of a shadow at exactly the right moment without any guarantee of how it would go. It looked like a child asking a question about birds, and a father saying, "I'll look into it," meaning I won't forget this, even when there are other things to carry. There are people who move through the world loudly enough that everyone knows they've been there, and then there are people who move through it carefully, who notice the things that need noticing and do the things that need doing and go home afterward without requiring you to thank them for it. The world needs both kinds, but it is the second kind that holds things together when everything else is falling apart, and the second kind that rarely gets a window office with a view of the lake, and the second kind that most of us walk past every day without understanding what we're walking past. Claire Whitmore understood it now. They left the building at noon. Maya went first, through the lobby, pausing briefly to look at the elevator doors one more time with the expression of someone mentally filing a location for future reference. Lucas followed, stopping at the security desk to exchange a brief word with the officer there. Already operating in the easy, functional authority of someone who belongs in a space, who the space has made room for, Claire walked them out through the main entrance and onto the sidewalk where Chicago was going about its Saturday business, people moving in the particular purposeful aimlessness of a weekend morning, the air cold and clean, and carrying the lake smell that she associated with this city in the way you associate smells with things you love without quite meaning to. She crouched down to Maya's level. "Thank you for coming," she said. Maya considered her, the serious expression, the dark eyes assessing. "Can we come back?" Maya said. "Whenever you want," Claire said. "Can I press the elevator button again?" "Every time." Maya nodded, satisfied, and then did something unexpected. She hugged Claire briefly and with the complete physical commitment of a child who has decided something and acts on it without overthinking. It was over in 2 seconds. Maya stepped back and took her father's hand. "Okay," Maya said, apparently to no one in particular. Claire stood up. She looked at Lucas. He was looking at his daughter with the expression she now understood was the unguarded version of him. The one that existed when he wasn't managing the part of himself that stayed watchful and contained and ready. It was the face of a man who had served and lost and come home and found, and a 6-year-old who used too much milk on her cereal and asked questions about pigeon migration, a reason good enough to rebuild around. He looked at Claire. "Monday," he said. "Monday," she confirmed. "I'll have the updated access protocol report on your desk by 9. "Don't put it on my desk before I'm there," she said. "I don't like finding things on my desk." He almost smiled. "Noted." He put his hand on Maya's shoulder, and they turned and walked north on the sidewalk. The yellow jacket bright in the November light, his dark jacket beside it, the two of them moving at the pace Maya set rather than the pace Lucas would have set alone. Claire watched them until they reached the corner. She had run this company for 3 years and she intended to run it for 30 more. She had stood in boardrooms and negotiated across tables and made decisions in the early hours of the morning that would take months to understand if they were right. She had survived the specific loneliness of being the person everyone looks to when they need to know if things are going to be okay, and she had survived the specific test of discovering that people she'd trusted were not what she'd believed them to be. She had also survived a Wednesday night in October when the storm came in off the lake, and 3 men waited in a service corridor, and a quiet man in a maintenance jacket stepped out of a shadow and said 2 words, and everything that followed from that was still unfolding in ways she would spend years learning to understand. At the corner, Lucas and Maya turned north and disappeared from her line of sight, the yellow jacket the last thing visible before they were gone. She stood on the sidewalk outside the building for another moment. The wind came in off the lake the way it does in November in this city, with a directness that doesn't negotiate, that says, this is what cold feels like, and you're going to feel it, and that is simply the arrangement. She pulled her coat tighter. Around her, the city moved in all directions at once, indifferent and continuous, and entirely unmoved by the specifics of any individual life occurring within it, which was not a cold fact, but a stabilizing one. The reminder that the world is bigger than your story and was here before it and will be hereafter. And the work of a life is to make something worth making inside that fact, not despite it. She looked up at the building. 42 floors, the windows reflecting the sky, the pigeons on the ledges of the upper floors doing what they always did. She went back inside. Some stories don't end. They just find their level. The place where the crisis has passed and the ordinary has resumed, and what you're left with is the changed version of the life you were living before, which is slightly harder and slightly more honest and, if you're paying attention, slightly more worth the living. Whitmore Logistics kept moving freight. The light stayed on in the tower. A man in a plain dark jacket rode the elevator to the mechanical room on 42 and made coffee and checked the camera feeds and did the work that needed doing, quietly, without announcement, the way the best work always gets done. And somewhere 6 blocks north, 2 pigeons sat on a window ledge in the November cold and went nowhere, because they were exactly where they were supposed to be, and they had everything they needed, and that was sufficient.